Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
The internet is full of half-truths and all-out lies. We've all seen them, and many people on social media complaining about it. Here's your chance to show and prove. WorldAfropedia.com is a black-owned and operated encyclopedia. There are several thousand articles, but we need help. We can't uncover all the truth ourselves. So please, join us and become a writer, editor, or blogger for WorldAfropedia.com today. Every little bit counts. We owe it to the future generations to put the truth out there. Visit WorldAfropedia.com, the African-centered encyclopedia, a global database of African knowledge for the purpose of bringing about global African wisdom and understanding. WorldAfropedia.com.
Well, Cassius, how do you rate yourself as a fighter?
Well, I wouldn't want to do too much bragging about it, but everybody that watches me fight or everybody that has witnessed one of my bouts, they say that I am the greatest that they've ever seen.
I got him a room at the Charles Hotel in Overtown.
Overtown is Miami's historic black community. It really was established in 1896 when the railroad came in and Miami was founded as a community. It was an absolute center of culture, education, social life. Anything you could get in Harlem, you could get in Overtown. It was just magnificent. Barbershops, restaurants, movie theaters, 5 or 6 of those. For many years, it was the very heart of black Miami. The civil rights movement started in Miami much earlier than it did elsewhere. That was a lunch counter sit-in in Miami before the one in Greensboro that started the whole civil rights sit-in phenomena. So Miami was really a little bit ahead of the civil rights movement.
Blacks had their own position, comfortable in themselves, and didn't pay attention to whites, and the whites did the same. The whites had their little Burdines and Jordan Martian. Don't come in here.
I took him shopping to one of the largest department stores in South Florida and in Miami, Burdines. There was some very nice shirts, and they were on sale. And other people were trying them on. The salesman came over and said, "We don't allow blacks to try on clothes." I couldn't believe this. Here I am, supposedly in a more enlightened town. He's not trying on clothes in my store, and he isn't in any major department store in downtown Miami. At that point, Cassius pulled me in the sleeve, and we went over and talked, and he said, "Look, I don't want to get in this kind of trouble. The police will come, and that's going to be bad for me." So he said, "Let's go to there's nice stores in the black section." So he showed me where they were, and we bought him some really nice clothes at the and some neat shoes at the black store.
Racial segregation was not as severe as it was, say, in Atlanta or in New Orleans, but nevertheless, it still existed.
And the kid didn't have a car. A lot of times he would run across the causeway and come to the South Beach. One day the cops stopped him, big skinny kid running across the highway, helter-skelter. So I may as well Dundee's fighter. And then they said, they called me up and said, "This?" I said, "Yeah, he is." It's the great fighter.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Friday, July 22nd, 2016. So I have been told. The audio segment you heard at the beginning from the documentary film Muhammad Ali, Made in Miami. Great film. PBS, I said this consistently. PBS, they do a lot of great documentary projects dealing with white supremacy. They are white folks who are certainly not ignorant about racism, but that's where you heard that segment from one of the speakers, one of our former C.O.W.S guests, Dr. Marvin Dunn, great historian, black author. Pleasure having him on the program talking about some of the history of white terrorism in Florida. Without further ado, this is our second book study session, Blood Brothers, on the fatal friendship between Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X. We are picking up, we are almost at the end of chapter 1. Almost, just a couple more pages and we'll be drifting to chapter 2. I hope people are paying attention to the footnotes. If you have an actual hard copy of the book, I try to say that consistently with the books that we read because they have so many great references, other books, films that you want to check out. That's how I found out about this documentary. I'd never even heard of it, and just kind of flipping through as we were reading last week, I saw, see if I can check that out. Great material. Without that, we will go ahead and get started. Context of White Supremacy, Blood Brothers, audio segment number 1.
Cassius Clay began reciting Muhammad's lessons, leaving his friends at a loss as to what he was talking about. Ferdy Pacheco recalled driving around in his vintage Cadillac convertible on a muggy Miami night with Clay and 2 women. Suddenly, Clay tapped the doctor on the shoulder and told him to pull over to the side of the road. He stood up and pointed toward the stars. "See that?" Cassius asked, his arm extended toward the sky. "It's the spaceship." "What spaceship is that?" one of the women asked. Clay stared at her, dumbfounded that she did not know about the spaceship. Then he launched into a lecture on nation theology. "One day, about 6,000 years ago, a bad, mad scientist named Dr. Jacob created the white race off the black. The mad doctor made the whites superior and pushed the blacks down into slavery. That period is coming to an end now." "What's that got to do with the spaceship?" the young woman asked. "Well, a spaceship took off with 26 yellow families living on it, circling the globe. They called it the mothership. The non-white races are being oppressed by the whites, and soon they will come down and wipe out the white race." "What they been waiting for, child?" asked the older woman. Clay, ignoring the question, rambled on in a serious tone. "Once a year they come down from the North Pole, put down a big plastic hose, and scoop up enough oxygen and ice to last them a year," he said. Then he just pointed toward the sky, looking in awe. "The mothership." For Cassius, the Muslims' tales about a big-headed scientist, mythical spaceships, and the coming of Armageddon were more than the stuff of fantasy. Muhammad's prophecy offered Clay a means of survival in a hostile country. Cassius's own belief in prophecy developed as a youth living in segregated Louisville. A schoolteacher explained, "If you can't stand the world you live in, and you can't change it, you've got to believe in magic, in predictions. That's Cassius when he was growing up, living with that wild father and all that crazy talk around the house. You've got to believe that things are going to change. So predictions have a great charm and appeal. Next year the white man's going to lose his power. 1966 will be a bad year for the white man." That's great news to some people dumb enough to believe it. Believing in predictions is a way of warding off evil in the present when you can't ward it off any other way. You can bear living miserable if you accept a prediction that tomorrow will be better. That's why you get so much predicting and prophecy in the Negro churches. That's why you get so much predicting and prophecy from Cassius Clay, too. For Clay, the black Muslims offered security, a sanctuary from the violent world that surrounded him, and he steadily gravitated toward the Miami Temple as a result. His frequent visits excited Sabakan and Saxon, who alerted Jeremiah X, minister of the Atlanta Mosque and the chief organizer of the nation in the Deep South. Jeremiah visited Cassius in Miami, teaching him about the Muslims' moral code. He explained that they prayed 5 times a day, at sunrise, noon, mid-afternoon, sundown, and before bed, and that all Muslims prayed facing east, toward Mecca. But before Clay prayed, he had to make the proper ablutions, rinsing his mouth and washing his hands, feet, and arms. Cleanliness, inside and out, Jeremiah reminded him, was absolutely essential. Furthermore, Muslims were required to attend at least 2 temple meetings each week, though because of Clay's schedule and his celebrity, the minister made an exception. Clay learned that Elijah Muhammad instructed his followers to live a righteous life, prohibiting extramarital sex, gambling, dancing, attending movies, taking long vacations, lying, stealing, defying civil authority, and disobeying ministers. Muslims, he commanded, should refrain from consuming alcohol, tobacco, and drugs, and from overeating. An overweight Muslim could be fined until he lost the excess weight. And pork was strictly forbidden. The hog was a parasite, dirty, brutal, quarrelsome, greedy, ugly, foul, a scavenger which thrives on filth, just like the white man. In the process of educating Clay about the laws of the Nation of Islam, Jeremiah cultivated a personal relationship with him, and later his brother Rudy, who was even more eager to join the nation. The more Cassius learned, the more he questioned. Jeremiah recognized that Clay's presence in the movement could create potential conflicts for the boxer and the nation alike. The minister understood that if the public learned about Clay's association with the nation, the boxer might be vilified. It could ruin his career. So Jeremiah sought the counsel of John Ali, the nation's national secretary and advisor to Elijah Muhammad. When Jeremiah called Ali on the telephone and informed him that a fighter had attended their meetings, Ali roundly condemned the minister for being involved with a boxer. Elijah Muhammad himself later told Jeremiah that he'd been sent to the South to make converts, not to fool around with fighters. Muhammad disapproved of sports, especially boxing, which he maintained was just another avenue for the exploitation of black youths by white, mostly Jewish men. He associated boxing with the evils of gambling, drunkenness, and crime. In his Muhammad Speaks column, he argued that sports encouraged blacks to throw away their money on the white man's games of chance. The only reason the white man allowed blacks to participate in their sports, he claimed, was to distract them from their real problems. Sports were just another tool to keep the black man down. Yet perhaps Clay's pursuit of a righteous life was not as incompatible with boxing as Muhammad believed. In many ways, the ritual and regimen of the nation's strict code of behavior mirrored the boxer's Spartan training. The Muslim ministers dictated when Clay prayed, what he ate, and how he spent his leisure time. Similarly, Angelo Dundee created his training routine. He told him when to rise in the morning, when to run, when to eat, when to spar, and when to go to bed. Clay's spiritual mentors and boxing instructors required hard work, sobriety, and proper nutrition. Both worlds, boxing and the Nation of Islam, demanded physical fitness and a purity that rewarded resistance to temptation. In Miami, Clay chose to occupy both worlds. There were two places where he felt most comfortable, two sanctuaries that provided shelter from outsiders and antagonistic white men, Muhammad's Temple No. 29 and the Fifth Street Gym. One hardened his body, the other nurtured his soul. Yet he had no idea what would happen when those two worlds collided. Chapter 2. God's Angry Man. I have no last name, just a name some white man gave one of my ancestors a long time ago. I'd rather be called Nigger. Malcolm X. On a cold April evening in 1957, a fight broke out between two black men at the corner of 125th Street and Lenox Avenue in Manhattan, the heart of Harlem. Swiftly, police cars arrived at the scene, sirens wailing, and officers jumped out of their vehicles. White patrolmen broke through the crowd, gripping their nightsticks, demanding the onlookers disperse. As the policeman thumped a suspect, the crowd watched in horror. "Why don't you carry the man to jail?" Johnson Hinton asked. In Harlem, patrolmen routinely subjected black men to random searches and brutal force. The officers ignored Hinton's protest, ordering him to move on. But he just wouldn't listen. Growing bolder and louder, he shouted, "You're not in Alabama! This is New York!" Enraged, Officer Mike Dolan knocked Hinton to the ground. The officer unleashed his baton, cracking Hinton in the skull until blood gushed onto the sidewalk. While the police stuffed his limp body into the squad car, black and brown faces looked on in disgust, complaining in hushed tones. It seemed that there was nothing that they could say, nothing that they could do. The one black man who had challenged the police found himself behind bars, silenced by a bloody baton. In Harlem, the black man's anger toward the white man had long simmered. Everywhere he turned, the white man embarrassed, exploited, and emasculated him. The white man arrested him. The white man raised the rent. The white man got the job. The white man cut his wages. The white man denied his loan application. The white man had better schools, nicer homes, and more money. The goddamn white man. To live in Harlem, Ralph Ellison wrote in 1948, is to dwell in the very bowels of the city. It is to pass a labyrinthine existence among streets that explode monotonously skyward with the spires and crosses of churches, and clutter underfoot with garbage and decay. Black families lived in crowded tenements, crumbling buildings infested by vermin and cockroaches. In the shadows of dark alleys and on crowded street corners, men sought relief, drinking, smoking, and gambling away the little money that they had. Poverty, addiction, and violence plagued black neighborhoods. Overcrowded and exploited politically and economically, Ellison observed, Harlem is the scene and symbol of the Negro's perpetual alienation in the land of his birth. As the squad cars pulled away from the scene, a woman who witnessed the assault rushed to the Nation of Islam's Shabazz restaurant at 113 Lenox Avenue. She told the men that one of their Muslim brothers, Johnson X, as he was known, had been severely beaten by the police. Immediately, Joseph X, the rugged captain of the local temple's Fruit of Islam, FOI, the nation's secret army, organized more than 50 men using a phone chain. Every temple had a security unit made up of an elite group of men who were held to a higher standard of discipline than other members. Trained soldiers, the FOI was responsible for enforcing the laws of the nation and protecting Elijah Muhammad's followers. They defended the temples and regularly drilled in paramilitary tactics, boxing, and judo, though they were forbidden from carrying arms. When the Muslims arrived at the 28th Precinct on 123rd Street, the police feared that they were hiding guns under their heavy coats. The temple's minister, a lean, copper-skinned man with a long face and square jaw, wearing thick, black, horn-rimmed glasses, marched right into the station. Standing nearly 6 feet 3 inches tall and sporting a camel-hair coat, Malcolm X spoke forcefully but calmly, requesting to see Hinton. The police denied that any Muslims were held inside their jail, but as an angry throng of nearly 2,000 black people gathered in front of the station, they allowed the minister to check on him. Lying on the cold cement floor of the jail, Hinton could hardly speak. An officer had struck him across the jaw with his baton when he began praying inside his cell. Containing his rage, Malcolm demanded that the lieutenant in charge take the concussed prisoner, who was actually suffering from subdural hemorrhaging, to a hospital. Fearing a riot outside the station, the police called for an ambulance. When the minister walked out of the precinct, he directed the brethren to follow him to the hospital. Outside of his congregation, few people in the crowd knew much about Malcolm. They had never seen him lead a march or a picket or a boycott. The Muslims rejected the American democratic system, refusing overt political action. They didn't even vote. Instead, the nation occupied an insulated world of complete separation. Elijah Muhammad taught his followers to respect civil authority and avoid confrontations. Be polite, courteous, and respectful, so that you may inspire respect from the police officers, he preached. If you are attacked when peaceful, God comes to our rescue. If you are aggressive, you must fight your own battle without Allah's help. Yet nonviolence had its limits, as Muhammad acknowledged. If attacked, the Holy Quran says, "Fight back." Tired of wanton police violence against blacks, Harlem itched to fight back. In Harlem, Most black men never dared to question a white man in uniform. So when Malcolm strode into the 28th Precinct, challenging white authorities, he inspired Black Harlem. From there, he marched at the front of a solid line of nearly 100 Muslims and the sympathetic onlookers who had gathered at the precinct, leading them to the hospital. As the Muslims advanced down Lenox Avenue, Harlem's busiest thoroughfare, more than 2,000 blacks clustered closely behind them. Shortly after they arrived at the hospital, the doctors treated Hinton, but then inexplicably released him, and he was taken back to jail. Surging back toward the police headquarters in a fury, within an hour, more than 4,000 people stood in solidarity with the nation outside the 28th Precinct. Standing in rank formation, God's angry men stared straight ahead, arms crossed, waiting for the minister's orders. Inside the station, Malcolm negotiated with the police, securing the release of 2 other Muslims who were arrested with Hinton. But the commanding officer refused to send the injured prisoner back to the hospital because he had to be incarcerated overnight to appear in court the next day. By 2:30 a.m., Malcolm sensed a stalemate and an opportunity to demonstrate his authority. The police pleaded with him to break up the crowd, promising that Hinton would continue to receive medical care. Fearing a violent confrontation between the police and his followers, he walked outside, turned toward one of his lieutenants, and whispered in his ear. Then he raised his fist, signaling for the Muslims to disperse. Without a word, the minister's troops drifted into the darkness, as did the other blacks who had gathered in the street. The police had never witnessed a man control a crowd the way that Malcolm X did that night. Stunned by the scene, an officer looked at James Hicks, a reporter for the Amsterdam News, and said, "No one man should have that much power." In the aftermath of the nation's protest against police brutality, Malcolm X became a Harlem folk hero. For the first time, he later recalled, the black man, woman, and child in the streets were discussing those Muslims. The New York City Police Department instantly became interested in those Muslims, too, urgently seeking more information about Mr. X. Undercover agents in the NYPD's surveillance program, the Bureau of Special Services, BOSS, sat in parked cars monitoring the activities of the Harlem Temple. Malcolm's increasing visibility in New York concerned the FBI, too, and about a year after BOSS began its surveillance, the FBI designated him a key figure. For the rest of his life, government agents would track his movements, document his speeches, and record his telephone calls. Malcolm could hardly smile, frown, or smell a flower without the FBI knowing about it. Meanwhile, public curiosity led increasing numbers of blacks to visit Malcolm's temple. Before the Johnson-Hinton episode, the New York Temple had only a few hundred members. Afterward, several thousand became followers of Elijah Muhammad at Temple No. 7. Benjamin Goodman was one such visitor. A tall young man with an angular face, Goodman was raised in the Christian churches of Virginia. After moving to New York, he bounced between unfulfilling jobs until he found a position in the shipping department of Vanguard Records. One of his friends at work insisted that he visit the temple at the corner of 116th Street and Lenox Avenue to hear the minister. Inside the paper-littered doorway of the storefront temple, a red hand-painted sign greeted visitors. "Welcome to Muhammad's Temple No. 7, every Wednesday and Friday at 8 p.m., Sunday at 2 p.m. Elevator service, 4th floor." When Goodman arrived for his first meeting, 2 sharply dressed men acknowledged him. "Welcome, brother." Climbing 3 flights of creaking, rotting stairs, he could hear the echo of black men's voices. When he reached the 4th floor, which was much cleaner than the others, 2 large men directed him into the men's room, where 4 other men stood bolt upright, eyes forward, lips closed. A stocky man in a dark suit, standing only a foot away from him, leaned in close enough to smell his breath, and firmly asked, "Do you have any weapons, alcohol, cigarettes, or drugs in your possession?" Had he answered affirmatively or reeked of liquor, he would have been asked to leave. After Goodman emptied his pockets, the security guard frisked him thoroughly. When the inspection was over, the guard thanked him for his cooperation and informed him that he could enter the auditorium. Goodman walked inside the lecture hall and sat on a metal folding chair on the men's side of the aisle, across from women dressed in white floor-length gowns and wearing head coverings. While he waited for the meeting to begin, he studied the blackboard, which was divided into two sides, one representing Christians, the other representing Muslims. On the left side, he saw an American flag framed by a cross and a silhouette of a black man hanging from a tree. In the corners of the flag, painted in bold letters, were the words Christianity, slavery, suffering, and death. On the opposite side, the corners of a red Muslim flag included the words Islam, freedom, justice, and equality. Beneath both flags, the congregation read the central question of the nation: who will survive the war of Armageddon? As Goodman pondered the question, an assistant minister named Brother Henry walked to the front of the room and welcomed the congregation in Arabic. Assalamu alaikum, peace be unto you. The visitors replied in unison, Wa alaikum salam, peace also be unto you. Only during the greetings did the nation's Muslims use Arabic. Not even Elijah Muhammad, the messenger himself, spoke or wrote the language. While Brother Henry lectured, a tall, rail-thin, bespectacled man wearing a dark blue suit, white shirt, and red tie sat at a small table studying 3x5 index cards. Occasionally he pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose while he penned notations. When Brother Henry introduced him, Malcolm X unfolded his body like a three-part extension ladder, rising from the chair. He gathered his index cards, the Bible, and the Quran, and walked toward the podium. Malcolm surveyed the packed auditorium, grinning. Then he began, Assalamu alaikum, Wa alaikum salam. Malcolm lectured on a variety of topics that day: the history of slavery, Negro ministers who preached the white man's religion, the Bible, that book of poison, and the evils of consuming pork. He did not say much about the Johnson-Hinton case, but he promised that if the police ever attacked another Muslim brother or sister, then they would be dealing with Malcolm X. Goodman had never heard a black man speak with such unbridled confidence and authority. Malcolm talked plainly, in a language that everyone in the audience understood, with a directness that bordered on open rebellion. At the end of the meeting, visitors were invited to join the nation. Malcolm asked them to raise their hands if they believed what he said was true. Goodman raised his hand. If a visitor could not commit to the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm asserted, the Muslims would not persecute him. You are among the deaf, dumb, and blind, he explained in a friendly voice. Returning to the temple for further study about the teaching of the devil, he said, would reveal hidden truths. After visiting the temple twice more, Goodman penned an initiation letter, the same letter that every convert wrote. After reading the letter, the applicant copied it verbatim by hand. Date: Mr. W.F. Muhammad, 4847 South Woodlawn Avenue, Chicago 15, Illinois. Dear Savior Allah, our Deliverer, I have been attending the teaching of Islam by one of your ministers 2 or 3 times. I believe in it, and I bear witness that there is no God but Thee, and that Muhammad is Thy servant and apostle. I desire to reclaim my own. My slave name is as follows: name, address, city and state. In Chicago, Muhammad's lieutenants carefully examined the applicant's letters. If the letter was written without errors, then the truth seeker received a questionnaire regarding his or her marital status, dependence, and employment. Upon completing the application process, new members immersed themselves in the world of the nation, submitting completely to the teachings of Muhammad. Every follower was supposed to give up dope, tobacco, alcohol, profanity, and vice of all kinds. In return, the believer was no longer a wandering Negro, ashamed of his or her skin color, weakened by Christianity. After initiation, new disciples proclaimed their loyalty to the Supreme Minister. In exchange for their devotion, the true believer received a new life, a new identity, and a new name. All true believers retained their first name and accepted an X in the place of their surname, their slave name. For example, in the New York Temple, Joseph Gravitt, the FOI captain, became Joseph X. Benjamin Goodman, the second man named Benjamin to join Temple No. 7, became Benjamin 2X. Black people, Muhammad taught, did not know their true last name. It remained a mystery. The X was a temporary replacement, until the messenger gave the follower an Arabic name, their original name, such as Ali, Muhammad, Sharif, or Shabazz, though many of his disciples went years without replacing the X. In rejecting one's slave name, the X signified crossing over and erasing the past, the legacy of slavery, and the life of self-loathing. It meant that a black man denounced what he was before he became a Muslim, an ex-slave. In 2 years, Benjamin 2X became one of Malcolm's assistant ministers. During a weekly seminar, Malcolm quizzed his assistants about religion, history, geography, politics, philosophy, economics, and current events. For every class, he required that each student bring a notebook, dictionary, thesaurus, and library card. When Benjamin and the other ministers were not working at their day jobs, they diligently studied the Bible and the Quran. They read the New York Times, the London Times, and a variety of news magazines, and they prepared for debates. Wasting time on television, movies, parties, and sports was unacceptable. Once his assistants convinced Malcolm that they were ready to do God's work, he took them out fishing on the streets of New York. Standing on congested street corners and stepladders, outside churches and drugstores, Malcolm courted lost souls, inviting them to hear the truth at Temple No. 7. Armed with a Bible and handbills, he worked the streets, talking to men who reminded him of a younger version of himself, hustlers, gamblers, and bottom feeders, men searching for a way out of the ghetto. He understood these men, their frustrations, their anger, and their language. He spoke directly, never wasting a word, appealing to their experiences that he had lived. And anyone who listened to Malcolm was invariably transfixed by his stories of his own reinvention. The path that led Malcolm to the Nation of Islam was a tortuous one. After bouncing around predominantly white reform schools and foster homes, Malcolm, 3 months shy of his 16th birthday, with only an 8th-grade education, eagerly boarded a Greyhound bus in Lansing and traveled to Boston. There, under the care of his 26-year-old sister Ella, Malcolm gravitated toward the hip swindlers standing on the street corners, the gangsters and bookies, dope dealers and pimps. These men educated him on the life of a hustler. An older man who called Malcolm homeboy taught him the importance of performance when he was shining the white man's shoes. Kneeling at a footstand, Malcolm mastered the art of polishing, brushing, and shining shoes, snapping the rag across the leather, making it pop like a firecracker. That popping sound was pure jive noise, worth 2 extra bits. Whether he was shining shoes, cleaning dishes, or serving diners on Pullman cars, Malcolm hustled. He earned generous tips from white men by shucking with a sly smile, ingratiating customers with compliments. When Malcolm finished work, he rushed to the nightclubs, where he danced and drank the night away, gambling his tips while he dreamed of hitting the jackpot. Eventually, he settled into the underworld of Harlem, where he came of age as Detroit Red, a small-time hustler sporting conked red hair and brightly colored zoot suits. His burglary spree ended in 1946 when the police nabbed him and his partner, Shorty Jarvis, and their white girlfriends. The judge gave the 21-year-old offender concurrent 8 to 10-year sentences. He wound up serving his 77-month incarceration at 3 Massachusetts penitentiaries. At the Charlestown State Prison, a dank, century-old fortress without running water, Malcolm festered in a dirty, cramped cell, lying on his cot, staring at the ceiling. In his misery, he yearned for the pleasures of the past, the rush of a robbery, the high from snorting cocaine. Big Red bragged about his criminal exploits and offered to acquire whatever the other prisoners needed: reefer, tobacco, liquor. He would later claim that he was an obstinate prisoner, a devout atheist nicknamed Satan for his mutinous behavior. After Malcolm transferred to Concord Prison, he received a startling letter from his brother Filbert, who explained that he and other members of the family had converted to the natural religion for the black man, Islam. Soon he read more letters from his brothers and sisters, educating him about the movement designed to help black people. In 1948, after Malcolm transferred to the Norfolk prison colony, his younger brother Reginald, a former hustler, visited him. He told Malcolm that there was a man who knew everything. "Who's that?" Malcolm asked. "God is a man," he answered, "and his real name is Allah." Reginald explained that Allah had come to America and taught everything he knew to his disciple Elijah, a black man just like us. Allah had instructed Elijah that the devil was also a man, the white man. Malcolm thought about all the white people who had hurt him and his family, the white supremacists who killed his father, the white doctor who diagnosed his mother as crazy, the white social workers who broke up his family, the white kids who called him nigger on the playground, the white schoolteacher who told him that he was foolish for thinking that a nigger could ever become a lawyer, the white judge who took 10 years of his life away, and all the other white folks who had done him wrong. His siblings continued to educate him through correspondence and their visits. They urged him to trust the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, the messenger of Allah, a small, gentle man who possessed the true knowledge of the black man. Reginald advised him to purify his body and avoid cigarettes, alcohol, drugs, and pork. Malcolm followed his instructions, accepting Muhammad's strict rules of morality. Like many of Muhammad's prison converts, he idolized the nation's patriarch. After sending Muhammad a letter he'd revised 25 times, they enjoyed a regular correspondence. Malcolm could not wait to meet Allah's prophet and serve his cause. On August 7, 1952, about a month after the Massachusetts Department of Corrections transferred his parole to the state of Michigan, he walked out of prison a new man, wearing a cheap suit and shedding the cloak of Big Red. Shortly after his release, Malcolm rode a bus to Detroit. Canvassing the neighborhoods of Black Bottom, he shared his story of self-emancipation, crediting Elijah Muhammad for his liberation from a life of destitution and delinquency. "Before hearing of Muhammad," he admitted, "I had nothing, knew nothing, and was nothing. I was addicted to and enslaved by all the evils and vices of this white civilization: dope, alcohol, adultery, thievery, and," he added hyperbolically, "even murder." Without Muhammad's grace, he had very little hope, desire, or intention of amounting to anything. After Malcolm served as an assistant minister for the Detroit Temple and proved himself an effective organizer, in late 1953, Muhammad rewarded his protege with his own ministry in Boston, where Malcolm established Temple No. 11. Shortly thereafter, Muhammad sent him to Philadelphia to further build the movement's membership along the East Coast. In just 3 months, Muhammad promoted his charismatic disciple once again, naming him minister of Temple No. 7 in New York. Muhammad recognized that no one could relate to the bottom-of-the-pile Negroes the way that Malcolm did. Those beaten-down, dead-end blacks trusted Malcolm because he also knew life in worn-out shotgun houses and rancid tenements. In the tenement neighborhoods of Harlem, Malcolm persuaded many blacks to hear him preach at the temple. But not everyone was easily convinced that Islam was the path to righteousness. When people heard him talk about the nation's theology, many just shook their heads in disbelief. One man yelled, "You niggers are crazy," and marched right past him. On another occasion, when Malcolm tried to convince a Baptist into converting to Islam, the man asked, "What are the rules of your organization?" Malcolm replied, "Well, my brother, you'll have to stop drinking, stop swearing, stop gambling, stop using dope, and stop cheating on your wife." The man thought for a moment. "Hell," he quipped, "I think I better remain a Christian." In the mid-1950s, during the nation's ascendance in the impoverished black neighborhoods of northern cities, Malcolm was fast becoming the most important symbol of the movement. The New York minister served as living proof that, through the messenger, anything was possible. If Muhammad's message could cleanse a depraved atheist criminal and transform him into a minister of God, a man who respected himself and his people, then Muhammad could save the most immoral degenerate. Malcolm redeemed, observed literature professor Michael Thelwell, was the Word incarnate, the message made flesh, the living metaphor and exemplar of the redemption of an entire race. As Muhammad's most prized minister and one of his closest confidants, the minister's presence was felt everywhere: Atlanta, Atlantic City, Buffalo, Jersey City, Newark, Pittsburgh, and Washington, D.C. In the 7 years after he left prison, the number of temples increased from 10 to 30. "I thank Allah for my brother minister Malcolm," Muhammad proudly declared. They became like father and son. Some of the messenger's aides believed that he cared more for Malcolm than for his own children. They forged a familial bond, speaking on the phone nearly every day, Muhammad advising him on all matters, professional and personal. "Anywhere you will find me," Muhammad said, "you will find him." In Malcolm's devotion to Elijah, he offered blind obedience. There was no one he trusted more. Whenever possible, Malcolm visited Chicago. A mutual friend recalled, "I sat in Elijah Muhammad's home one Saturday morning while he was lecturing a group of ministers. The doorbell rang, and a servant came in and announced that Malcolm had come. Elijah's eyes lit up as if the prodigal son was home. He leaped from his seat, and when Malcolm appeared, they embraced and kissed." Muhammad had no doubt that Malcolm would take a bullet for him. Malcolm had said as much. "I would give my life so that he may live. He has done so much for me." Yet Muhammad was not the only one closely following Malcolm's growing influence within the nation. In late 1958, a black FBI informant assessed the New York minister's rising power. "Brother Malcolm ranks about third in influence, behind Muhammad and his son-in-law, Supreme Captain of the Fruit, Raymond Sharif. Outside of the messenger's immediate family, he is the most trusted follower. He is an excellent speaker, forceful and convincing. He is an expert organizer and untiring worker. Malcolm has a strong hatred for blue-eyed devils, but this hatred is not likely to erupt in violence, as he is much too clever and intelligent for that. He is fearless and cannot be intimidated by words or threats or personal harm. He has most of the answers at his fingertips. And, the informant warned, he should be carefully dealt with." More than any other event, the documentary The Hate That Hate Produced brought Malcolm into the country's national consciousness. In New York, journalist Louis Lomax and news anchor Mike Wallace sensed that the rising popularity of the black Muslims in Harlem and the surrounding controversy over their beliefs would spark great interest. In the summer of 1959, Lomax gained Muhammad's cooperation through Malcolm. In a sensationalized narrative, Wallace told viewers that they were watching a story of black racism. The documentary portrayed the Muslims as adversaries of the civil rights movement. The growing black supremacist group, it declared, taught their anti-white and anti-American doctrine in more than 50 cities and claimed more than 250,000 members, an exaggerated figure that only enhanced viewers' fears about the nation. In the documentary, Muhammad's heir apparent, the younger, more charismatic minister, Malcolm X, overshadowed the nation's leader. Almost overnight, Malcolm appeared on news broadcasts across the country. The national media's reaction to the documentary convinced Muhammad that the press deliberately distorted his teachings in an effort to undermine him. Widespread attacks on the nation convinced Muhammad that Malcolm should respond directly to critics, despite accusations from some nation officials who blamed the New York minister for seeking too much publicity. Yet Muhammad insisted that Malcolm should become more visible. If Malcolm became famous, he explained, it will make me better known. Over the next year, Malcolm began traveling more, giving interviews on television and radio. He visited college campuses, delivered lectures, and engaged in public debates. His life became a blur of planes and trains, speeches and sermons. His frequent appearances on television shaped a public perception that Malcolm was the Muslims, creating envy inside the nation's headquarters. Muhammad warned him, "You will grow to be hated when you become well known, because usually people get jealous of public figures." Given his recent heart attack and chronic bronchial asthma, Muhammad could never have taken on the demands of traveling as Malcolm did. The frail sexagenarian's deteriorating health led him to move to the drier climate of Phoenix, Arizona. Separated from the national headquarters, he empowered Raymond Sharif, John Ali, and his sons, Herbert and Elijah Jr., to run the daily operations in Chicago. Muhammad's physical decline and heightened sense of mortality led him to tighten his grip on the world around him. He carefully monitored his ministers, requiring them to record their weekly sermons and send tapes to Chicago, ensuring that they did not deviate from his message. He especially depended on Sharif and his network of temple informants to report any conflicts or subversive activity within the nation. The more hostile attention the Muslims received from outsiders, the more paranoid Muhammad became. "He has tremendous faith in himself and Allah," a minister told journalist William Worthy. "He trusts his subordinates to a degree, but essentially he thinks that no one is his friend. He alone is going to run the Nation of Islam, and he is so strong right now that a split in the organization would be impossible at this time." In the spring and winter of 1960, thousands of college students in dozens of cities settled on a new tactic for forcing change to the civil rights landscape: the sit-in. This nonviolent direct action movement was aimed at desegregating Southern lunch counters. Yet the sit-in was of little use in the North, where black people could eat at any coffee shop or lunch counter. There, the blurred color line of de facto segregation, hardened by history and custom, created separate and unequal neighborhoods, poor public schools, dilapidated housing projects, and persistent unemployment. Trapped in a cycle of poverty, blacks lived as second-class citizens, fatigued by empty promises of a better life. "The mood of the Negro, particularly in New York City," Louis Lomax asserted, "is very, very bitter. He is losing faith. The Negro on the streets of Harlem is tired of platitudes from white liberals." On a mild Saturday afternoon in May 1960, about 3 months before Cassius Clay departed New York for the Rome Olympics, an estimated 10,000 Harlemites, standing shoulder to shoulder, attended an outdoor freedom rally at the intersection of West 125th Street and 7th Avenue. The large assembly of people, most of whom were not Muslims, attested to Malcolm's growing popularity as a political figure. Responding to the urban unrest, he offered a broad message of solidarity. "As black people, we must unite," he insisted. He exhorted the masses to follow fearless black leaders who will stand up and help the so-called American Negro get complete and immediate freedom. While civil rights activists challenged segregation in the South, a temper of defiance swept through northern cities like an epidemic. Radicals tried to cure the disease by pressing for full citizenship, equal rights, and racial justice. Well before black power became a rallying cry, the belief in self-determination and racial pride blossomed as northern black activists fought for better jobs, quality education, and open housing. No one articulated black rage against American hypocrisy and the failures of democracy more strongly than Malcolm did. Despite his calls for unity, he could hardly resist criticizing civil rights leaders who advocated integration. Although he did not call anyone out by name, he made it clear that black people wanted leaders who are not afraid to demand freedom, justice, and equality. We do not want any more Uncle Toms. Many admired Malcolm for his fearlessness. He was willing to debate anyone, anytime, anywhere. Malcolm debated the way Clay fought, swinging from the opening bell, hitting his opponent with hard cuts and fierce jabs. Unrestrained by the conventional niceties of debate, he played by his own rules, on his terms. He cultivated a combative style, bobbing and weaving, pivoting the conversation in the direction that he wanted. Malcolm was not interested in simply scoring points and landing a few punches. Decisions were not his goal. He swung for the knockout. Alex Haley recalled, he would turn a radio or television program to his advantage in a way he credited to the boxing ring's great Sugar Ray Robinson, who would dramatize a round's last 30 seconds. Similarly, Malcolm would eye the big studio clock, and at the instant it showed 30 seconds to go, he'd pounce in and close the show with his own verbal barrage. Photographers popularized a fiery image of him, lecturing at the podium, fist clenched, face masked with a snarl. Yet Malcolm's behavior on stage belied the provocative image of the angry black man. Dressed in a conservative suit, with his tie perfectly knotted, he appeared more like an intellectual than an itinerant preacher. Before responding to a question, Malcolm looked back at the moderator or his opponent, holding their full attention. Then, after calculating his response, he thoughtfully answered. Joseph Durso interviewed Malcolm, expecting more of a platform speaker, somebody who was very militant. But he was more cerebral than physical. He reasoned. He was almost like a college professor. On multiple occasions, Malcolm matched wits with Bayard Rustin, the veteran civil rights activist and close friend and advisor of Martin Luther King. In January 1962, they debated at Manhattan Community Church, a liberal congregation made up mostly of whites. In the past 2 years, they had become friendly rivals, fully aware of each other's tricks and strategies. Rustin, an advocate of racial cooperation and direct action against segregation, argued that separatism failed to address the problems facing black people. It left them powerless to change the oppressive conditions of the society they inhabited. Without any clear plan, Rustin charged, Malcolm resorted to emotionalism. "When a man is hanging on a tree," Malcolm snapped, "and he cries out, should he cry out unemotionally? When a man is sitting on a hot stove and he tells you how it feels to be there, is he supposed to speak without emotion? This is what you tell black people in this country when they begin to cry out against the injustices that they're suffering. As long as they describe these injustices in a way that makes you believe you have another 100 years to rectify the situation, then you don't call that emotion. But when a man is on a hot stove, he says, 'I'm coming up, I'm getting up.' Violently or non-violently doesn't even enter the picture. I'm coming up. Do you understand?" Pleased by his decisive blow, Malcolm flashed a sardonic smile. The same satisfied grin that eased onto Jack Johnson's face after the black boxer knocked his white opponents to the canvas. As Malcolm's celebrity grew, he became empowered, speaking more independently about politics. The less time he spent inside Mosque No. 7, the less he spoke about Muslim theology. Privately, Malcolm became convinced that the nation needed to engage in more action. As Muhammad read news clippings and transcripts of Malcolm's speeches and debates, he grew suspicious about his popular minister's motives. In Chicago, Muhammad's lieutenants whispered that Brother Malcolm was trying to take over the nation. Muhammad suspected that Malcolm aspired to lead the Muslims into the front lines of protests, though he feared such involvement would only attract greater scrutiny from the government. On February 15, 1962, the messenger wrote Malcolm, reminding him not to go too much into details on the political side, nor into the subject of a separate state here for us. The nation's patriarch ordered him to speak only about what you yourself have heard me say. He insisted that Malcolm avoid discussing political issues, An impossible request, as long as Malcolm engaged civil rights activists. Less than a month after he received Muhammad's edict, Malcolm debated James Farmer at Cornell University. Speaking first, Farmer, leader of the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, shrewdly borrowed the minister's standard speech about the white man's crimes against blacks. He explained that everyone already knew that racism poisoned America. Then he aggressively criticized the nation's theology and separatist doctrine. The time has passed when we can look for pie in the sky, when we can depend upon someone else on high to solve the problem for us, he said. What we want Mr. X, the representative of the black Muslims and Elijah Muhammad, to tell us today is what his program is, what he proposes to do about killing this disease. Turning toward his opponent, he attacked Malcolm's flank, demanding an answer. We know the disease, physician. What is your cure? The question haunted Malcolm. Farmer had set the perfect trap. Malcolm slowly rose from his seat and took the microphone. He rambled for a few minutes, searching for the answer that the black masses were waiting to hear. But he could not give them what they wanted, not as long as Elijah Muhammad was listening. Chapter 3. Who made me is me. I'm a boxer, and I really don't want anything to do with the civil rights program right now. Cassius Clay. The morning definitely did not show Gorgeous George in his most gorgeous light. Born George Raymond Wagner in 1915, the 46-year-old performer showed up at the Las Vegas radio station looking hungover and worn out. His skin had a sickly pallor, his famous platinum blonde hair hanging uncharacteristically loose without his Georgie pins. The most famous professional wrestler in America was less than 1.5 years away from retirement and 2.5 away from dying of a terminal liver condition brought on by decades of heavy drinking. But at showtime, George could still muster enough energy to please the crowds. Clay arrived in Las Vegas on the evening of Wednesday, June 21st, 1961, and the next morning he met the wrestler at the station. They both had tickets to peddle. George had a grudge match, they were all grudge matches with him, scheduled for June 23rd at the Las Vegas Convention Center against Freddie Blassie. Clay was fighting Kolo Duke Sabadong, a 6'7" Hawaiian of Samoan ancestry, at the convention center on Monday the 26th. Turning first to Clay, the show's host asked about his chances with the experienced, hard-punching Sabadong. The Hawaiian had a mixed career that included wins over club fighters and losses against better boxers. He had also fought contenders, though he usually did not finish those fights on his feet. When the host asked Clay about his own chances, he was circumspectly confident. "I can't say I was humble, but I wasn't too loud," Clay later recalled. The host then turned to George. In the early years of television, Gorgeous George practically invented the persona of the flamboyant, bombastic villain. After observing that the untalented freaks, baboons, and foreigners who passed themselves off as professional wrestlers attracted the largest audiences and purses, he asked himself, what if a guy had a flair for showmanship and could also wrestle? Would he go over? George Wagner reinvented himself as Gorgeous George, a villain of the first order. He dressed effeminately. Long dyed hair, gold-plated sequin Georgie pins, satin outfits, reportedly an ermine jockstrap, monogrammed towels, and robes that looked like they had been lifted from Liberace's closet, and swished down the aisle to the ring to pomp and circumstance. Once inside the robes, his valet sprayed a fine, sweet-smelling mist from an atomizer on the robes, canvas, and, stealthily, on the referee and opponent. The Gorgeous One performed other pre-match rituals with great solemnity and formality, but once the bell sounded, he was capable of committing any vile trick or underhanded tactic to win a match. Gorgeous George was, in short, the very negation of the American male athlete. The persona he originated was equal parts drag queen, aristocratic prig, and low-down cheat. And audiences in arenas across the country and on television could not seem to get enough of him. The host asked George what would be the outcome of his upcoming match. "I'll kill him. I'll tear off his arm," Clay recalled George saying. "If this bum beats me, I'll crawl across the ring and cut off my hair, but it's not going to happen because I'm the greatest wrestler in the world." Floating on a sea of self-endorsement, he continued to wax eloquently about how great and beautiful he was. "And all this time," Cassius remembered, "I was saying to myself, man, I want to see this fight. It don't matter who wins or loses. I want to be there to see what happens." Clay closely watched the match, noting the wrestler's grand entrance, illuminated by a spotlight and covered by a red velvet gown lined with white satin. George moved imperiously toward the ring, shouting that the spectators who booed him were ignorant peasants. It was a sensational act, and afterward Clay vowed, "Although I'd never been shy about talking, if I talked even more, there was no telling how much money people would pay to see me." He later told Dundee about George's performance, concluding, "This is a good idea." "Niño con boca grande," the Cubans in the Fifth Street gym had called Cassius. But in Las Vegas, his mouth, like the Grinch's heart, seemed to grow 3 sizes bigger. A few days later, he told sports writer George King what to expect in the fight. "Someone's got to go before the 10th, and you can bet it won't be me." There was no way he would lose, he explained. Losing a fight against a big Hawaiian just was not a possibility. Sabadong made his most pointed statements with his fists in the ring. From the first round, it was clear that Clay was faster and infinitely superior in boxing ability. But the Duke had a few dirty tricks that would have shocked even gorgeous George. When he got a chance, he hit Clay low, on the brakes and after the bell, and he used his head as a third fist. "I threw a couple of low punches, just to let him know I was there," he later said. "The first time I hit him low, his eyes went as big as saucers. I was going to bite his ear. You know when you're in clinches, you get the guy's ear between your teeth and give it a little tug. That usually would bring water to their eyes." Sabadong's problem was that he rarely got close enough to Clay to hit low, butt, or bite. Constantly moving, Cassius peppered him with jabs and hooks, landing harder punches occasionally, but not often enough to take him out. The fight went the distance, but for Clay, it was a learning experience. Professional boxing was not like the amateur version of the sport, where referees passed out penalties for the slightest infractions. In the pro ranks, you had to expect the unexpected and protect yourself at all times. Clay departed the convention center a wiser boxer, and he left Las Vegas with a new bag of verbal tricks.
Context of White Supremacy. First audio segment done. Folks have comments they would like to share. Feel free. The number to dial is 641-715-3640. The code is 564-943#. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. Number again, 641-715-3640. The code is 564-943#. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. If you do not want to use your phone to chime in, you can use the free VOPE line. It's linked at Black Talk Radio Network. If you need the address, it is tiny, TINY.cc/1race. And that is the number 1. Address again, tiny, TINY.cc/1race. And that is the number 1. When you put in that address, click the link on the left of the page. It says free VOPE line. Click that. It will open a small window on your screen. Top line, select the number that I just gave out. It's a drop-down menu. That number again is 641-715-3640. Next line, it will ask for the code. That code again is 564943. Final line, it will ask for a name. You can use a real name, nickname. You can press random keys, whatever you're comfortable with. Once you get all that entered, click the green button at the bottom. It will connect you to the live program. You should be able to hear us. It is the same procedure. If you would like to participate, you'll see the dial pad on your screen. Press *6. When you do so, you'll hear the audio prompt. Press the number 1. We will get you on the line. I think at least for people listening last week, book might have given the impression that this was just going to be like a sports book and just following the boxing career of Muhammad Ali. I don't exactly think that. I didn't expect that was what it was going to be, but that is not the case. I think this week, in particular, with a lot more information. This is not a sports book. This, to me, reads more like genuine history with both of these individuals. We will get to some of the folks who dialed in who have commentary to share. Again, the number 641-715-3640. The code 564943 pound. Press *6 if you would like to participate. All the folks who dialed in with a hand up, if you have commentary, feel free to chime in.
Greetings. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Greetings, everyone. Yes, this particular section is when the writers are doing a full job of, I wouldn't say compare, but kind of like illustrating both of the individual subjects about the book. With Malcolm, Minister Malcolm, he was very instrumental into opening the temples all over this part of the world, and with his energy, with the energy that he had. Although he kind of like, in a sense, was going so fast without eating and sleeping, to whereas he was having health problems because of it, which is natural if a person doesn't eat that much and sleep that much and is constantly doing things on he really, when it comes to the people activity of economics and how Mr. Fuller describes it, he was primarily following that in a codified way, from what I have studied and what I'm hearing right now with him, and in turn, when you do those things, when it's time for you to say something, you probably have something constructive to say that others will want to listen to, because you have basically done a lot of work in the process. The documentary that was hosted by Mike Wallace, The Hate That Hate Produced, was a profound documentary. It's, from my knowledge, is still available for anyone to view it on YouTube. I would gather it probably elevated Minister Malcolm to a national status for people who were not members of the Nation of Islam, because it did carry outside of New York. It did carry outside of New York, the New York area. It also, in a sense, helped elevate blacks that was in the media, because Louis Lomax kind of like was picked to do the direct interviews by Minister Malcolm. Of course, he was not going to accept a white reporter to do the work, and he had known Louis Lomax, and that kind of like elevated another black person, in turn also another field of importance to report the activity that was going on. And that really kind of like, I wouldn't say good or bad, catapulted Minister Malcolm to a very known status. And as we know, some other incidents took place. The hierarchy of the Nation of Islam was described in this past reading. Also, there is reason to suspect that John Ali was, I've read, as an agent within the Nation of Islam. A prior activity job that he had was with naval intelligence before he got into the Nation of Islam, which was very unusual, because during that time in the nation, there was very few people who actually had college degrees. Very few. Matter of fact, it was still recent that Minister Malcolm was able to convince that Mr. Muhammad's kids go to college, and he was real close with one of Elijah Muhammad's sons, the one that's the head of a quote unquote Orthodox branch of Islam, Wars Muhammad. Going over to Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali. His means to understand the Nation of Islam teachings. I have some background experience from it to concur about the letter, because they will send that letter back to you. If you made one mistake on that letter, they will send it back to you in the mail. My father was as he was joining the Nation of Islam back in the late 60s and around 67, 68. That process was still in play. The Nation of Islam was very well organized. Very well organized. It was functioning somewhat as a nation. That title wasn't just there just for show. They had their own set of rules and laws, and if you didn't follow them, they did have enforcement, as was mentioned. Each of the temples had an order of things. Unfortunately, with a lot of not too good stories that was involved with that. Also, like if you didn't collect a certain amount of money based on selling the newspaper and other different things, but nevertheless, it did have organized. It was very well organized and had a lot of order, and was proceeding as a quote unquote nation. those are some of the observations I had, and someone else can go on. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Other folks who dialed in, who had a hand up, do y'all have commentary you wanted to share?
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Now we know where Mike Tyson got bite in the ear from. So I found that to be interesting. Man, I'm not too familiar with Ali's career, but it could be active racism or not. I don't know. To say that he got his style from his style of oratory from Gorgeous George, who played a homosexual wrestler. I'm not sure if Ali ever admitted to that or not. I'm not sure. Also wanted to say that every time a white author talks about the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, I think they try to make fun of it, the way they word the thing. It's like in a light where, this is so unbelievable. And yet it's coming from a person who believes people walked across the ocean and God split it for them, and people who died on the cross and came back 3 days later. Like, their mythology is as out there as anyone's. So I just find that like as an act of racism, because they always focus on that Yaqub story and just how far-fetched this sounds. Like the Christian oral stories aren't as far-fetched. So I think that's always an act of racism, because usually when a black author, minus Alex Haley, talks about it, they don't give it that credence. They give it some respect. Even though it might be a little far-fetched, but they respect that's their ideology or whatever. Other than that, I'm glad that the book took a different spin, and we're getting more into some real things, and I'm just looking to learn some things about these two men that I didn't know already, and I'm moving on.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
All right. Greetings to you, Gus, and to all the callers and the listeners. I thought of the same thing that Thomas said. I said, okay, that's where the biting of the ear thing came from. That was the first thing that popped in my mind, so I'm glad he brought that up. This book is turning out to be very interesting. I like the areas that Thomas also pointed out in regards to the acts of racism, because I peeped that too, and I was looking at that. I said, and I thought this is on very similar lines. So I'm really glad he touched on that. There was a section on page 19 going into 20 where this. Where is she? Where is it? Oh, yeah, this white, I guess she was a white school teacher of Muhammad Ali's, and she wrote something that I found to be extremely telling. It says, she said in an interview, believing in predictions is a way of warding off evil in the present when you can't ward it off any other way. You can bear living miserable if you accept a prediction that tomorrow will be better. That's why you get so much predicting and prophecy in the Negro churches. That's why you get so much predicting and prophecy from Cassius Clay too. And during workplace racism, I was saying that white people are like mini FBI agents, and they're doing these psychological assessments on us like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And to me, this was a very brilliant example of that when she discussed the whole idea of black people being able to basically live miserable if you accept the prediction that tomorrow will be better. Made me think of when white people used to tell black people that, God made white people to serve God, and God made blacks to serve the white man, and that the black man will get his reward in heaven while we see the white man get heaven on earth in the here and now. And to me, that is just a brilliant assessment of the psychopathology of what we have been inculcated with, this whole idea that we can wait till tomorrow to make things better. And while we're waiting till tomorrow, they're continuing to refine things in a way that there will never be a tomorrow. And I just think that was just an incredible display of how white people analyze us on such a deep psychosocial level that exactly what she said then is exactly what's playing out with us today. The next thing, because I missed a portion of the section, I just ended up having to take care of something, but I'm glad I'm going to go back over it because this book is just an incredible read. But there's a section on page 25 where they write, the police had never witnessed a man control a crowd the way that Malcolm X did that night. Stunned by the scene, an officer looked at James Hicks, a reporter from the Amsterdam News, and said, no one man should have that much power. In the aftermath of the nation's protest against police brutality, Malcolm X became a Harlem folk hero. For the first time, he later recalled, the black man, woman, and child in the streets were discussing those Muslims. The New York City Police Department instantly became interested in those Muslims too. Urgently seeking more information about Mr. X, undercover agents in the NYPD surveillance program, the Bureau of Special Services, BOSS, sat in parked cars monitoring the activities of the Harlem Temple. Malcolm's increasing visibility in New York concerned the FBI too, and about a year after BOSS began its surveillance, the FBI designated him a key figure. For the rest of his life, government agents would track his movements, document his speeches, and record his phone calls. Malcolm could hardly smile, frown, or smell a flower without the FBI knowing about it. Meanwhile, public curiosity led increasing numbers of blacks to visit Malcolm's temple. Before the Johnson-Hinton episode, the New York temple had only a few hundred members. Afterward, several thousand became followers of Elijah Muhammad at Temple Number 7. I have always said that incident was the beginning of the end for Brother Minister Malcolm. The reason why was because once he displayed that sort of articulation of just immense black self-respect, the organization and discipline, it was something that was exposed to the enemy in a way that I don't know if he was aware at that time, that would have put him under such heavy surveillance, because Bureau of Special Services in New York has a notorious history, just with the kind of things that they've done to black people, brutality-wise, surveillance-wise, and I just find that to be very telling, because that's also, I think, one of the earliest instances of multiple law enforcement organizations working together in tandem, in a way that, let's say, when, like we heard after 9/11, they created these broader abilities for different organizations like the CIA and all these other organizations to work together against, insurgency. And to me, this was the beginning of that, or kind of like the origins of that, with the BOSS and then eventually the FBI, and them working in tandem with one another. And I've always felt that was the beginning of the end. And what accelerated it was when the documentary by Louis Lomax and I forget the white guy's name, but the documentary, when that came out and it gave him national exposure, it was like white people were like, wait a minute, he's spreading this nigger theology around the country. And when they looked back at what the BOSS surveillance and the NYPD surveillance also was bringing into the light as well, was just his mindset, the way he felt, his access to just reality and understanding white people on a deep level, where he could actually really figure them out in a way psychologically that I think they had never seen a black man do. And once that ideology was spread on a nationwide level, it attracted a lot of people to the Nation of Islam, but it also, I think, accelerated their interest in seeing him meeting his demise as quickly as possible. There was another brief section on page 36 where they write, many admired Malcolm for his fearlessness. He was willing to debate anyone, anytime, anywhere. Malcolm debated the way Clay fought, swinging from the open bell, hitting his opponent with hand cuts and fierce jabs. Unrestrained by the conventional niceties of debate, he played by his own rules on his terms. He cultivated a combative style, bobbing and weaving, pivoting the conversation in the direction that he wanted. Malcolm was not interested in simply scoring points and landing a few punches. Decisions were not his goal. He swung for the knockout. Alex Haley recalled he would turn a radio or television program to his advantage in a way he credited to the boxing ring's great Sugar Ray Robinson, who would dramatize around the last 30 seconds. Similarly, Malcolm would eye the big studio clock, and at the instant it showed 30 seconds to go, he'd pounce in and close the show with his own verbal barrage. And that reminded me of a lecture where John Henrik Clarke had talked about Malcolm X, and he had discussed the fact that when Malcolm X would go for different debates, especially dealing with Africa, John Henrik Clarke was probably the main person he would go to get up-to-date information and historical information on these countries. And he said he would compile a folder with information that he would present to Malcolm to read and peruse before he would go for his debate. And he said there was a debate that he was having with a white man, I believe it was on a television show, and he had said that he had sent him some articles, and he had told him a bunch of information and some articles, and he said, use what you would like, and you can discard the rest. Whatever you don't need, you don't have to hold on to it. So Malcolm actually was only able to read 2 articles that he gave him. And Dr. Clarke said that the white man was actually carrying the conversation in the direction that Malcolm wasn't prepared for, because he did not get to really study because he was up so late the night before. He only got to peruse the 2 articles before he went on the program. And he said with those 2 articles, that he literally verbally put that man in such a corner that he just fully embarrassed him. And he was able to just take the information from those 2 articles and just elucidate such profound information and his ability to use storytelling to his advantage to literally paint this white man into a corner that just made him look silly by the time the debate was over. And to me, this kind of just incredible brilliance and just the way he transformed his life in such a holistic way in which he was beyond reproach as far as anyone trying to say that he was doing any of the things that he was doing before he changed his life, I think made him a very, very dangerous person, because he was, like they said somewhere in here, they alluded to him being just that shining example of what Black transformation, Black self-respect looked like in the flesh, like literally walking, talking, and breathing. And I think that in and of itself made him probably the most dangerous man in America when he was alive. And with that, I'll mute my line, and thank you very much for choosing this book, because I think it's really profound with the information that's bringing forward about both of them.
For sure. How did you conclude that Muhammad Ali's teacher was white?
Oh, I guess maybe I misread it. I assumed she was white just based on what was said. They didn't allude to her race there at all, did they?
I didn't see. I went back to double check. I didn't see them give her racial classification, and I looked at the footnote, and they didn't give a name, because I was gonna look online to see if they had more details. But
I just assumed she was white based on what was said. My bad. I could be incorrect. That is true. I wish we did have her name, because it just seemed like an analysis that a white person would give based on the subject matter and the way she was able to elucidate on the Negro churches and that whole concept of waiting till tomorrow to do something about your misery that's happening right now up in front in your face. So I could be incorrect, excuse me. Thank you for that.
Could I get some insight on that?
Sure.
From my studies, Muhammad Ali grew up in the quote-unquote segregated South. And I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that during that time and in that environment, all of his teachers and administrators were non-white Black people. I know his high school principal, who saved him from getting put back because he's dyslexic and couldn't really read very well or write, was a Black male. He was well known even outside of the high school, because as a child myself, growing up in the early mid-60s, teachers and Black school administrators in your environment where you stayed at they were like celebrities in a sense. And so I would say that the person probably was non-white Black. I'll be surprised if otherwise. I'll be very surprised otherwise, especially during the time when he was in grade school.
Mm-hmm. It does say that in the paragraph before it gives this quotation from the school teacher that him growing up in segregated Louisville, quote unquote segregated, generally that, at least in my experience, for the most part, that would generally mean that you have, Black schools, Black teachers, but have to see.
I recall myself when I was in elementary school, I had the only white teacher that was in the entire elementary school. So one thing I remember with her, she had some bad breath. But yeah. And I also thought about later on, what did she do wrong that she had to go to this nigger school to teach? You know. Yeah, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that all of his teachers were non-white black.
Now that you brought that up, Gus, I was just looking at the paragraph, and they say a school teacher explained. So I don't know if they're saying that she was actually his school teacher or it was just a school teacher that they, interviewed. So I'm thinking it would be a school teacher that knew him. But if this person was black, their perception was brilliant. I just think that just stood out to me immediately.
One more thing. He was on a famous game show that was in the '60s, where they would bring the person that they're using as a subject, which was him, and they would bring in people that were instrumental in his life. And there was a female teacher that was one of those people. I can't remember the name of that program. Very, very famous, popular game show program used to come on in the '60s, and she was very quote unquote light skinned, black female. So you may be talking about that person because she was invited to come on the show to speak about her place. With, at that time, he was already Muhammad Ali, and globally famous, that she must have been pretty much instrumental in his life, because she was one of the people that was invited on the show to talk about her time with him. So, and I recall, matter of fact, you can see that, you can find that on YouTube, who's probably the exact person that you're talking about.
I think that's This Is Your Life. It's on.
Yeah,
YouTube.
That's it. That's the program.
Folks want to check that out. It's on YouTube. Anywho, that's mystery folks can dig into if they are so inclined to get more information, because that quote is from a footnote. Jack Olson, he wrote "Black is Best," and I think the co-authors of this book might have taken that whole quote from Jack Olson's book, Black is Best, where he's talking about black athletes and white supremacy in the 1960s. Jack Olson is also a white man who incidentally also wrote about Geronimo Pratt of the Black Panther Party. That book has a lot of great information and gigantic overlap with the surveillance of black people, Geronimo Pratt, Minister Malcolm X, Assata Shakur, Muhammad Ali, and many, many others. But it might be something folks want to check out to see if he gives more details about the school teacher and that. If other folks have commentary they would like to share, you should get your hand up to share before we get to the second audio segment. Some of the quick notes that stood out that I wanted to make sure I got in as well. Importance of black journalism, talking about Muhammad Speaks and some of the other black publications of the time where they're quoting and getting some of their information. Muhammad Speaks, certainly Malcolm X was big time involved in propagating that, getting information out that was then, remains now extremely important. And if you go to some of the major white-dominated institutions, they have a lot of those older newspapers. Can be a real treasure if you can go back and kind of check out some of the things that they were talking about. But the quote where he says, Muhammad Speaks argued that sports encouraged blacks to throw away their money on the white man's games of chance. The only reason the white man allowed blacks to participate in their sports, he claimed, was to distract them from their real problems. Sports were just another tool to keep the black man down. Certainly agree with that one. Definitely. And even just time and energy. The financial aspect of it, in terms of throwing our money away, is certainly important, but I would say throwing our time and energy away, where you have lots and lots of black people who are so invested in it. It takes so many forms in terms of taking up time, playing it, watching it, debating and talking about it, the video game aspect of it, just really time and energy when we could be doing other things that are going to have a more constructive value, and all of this just making money for whites. Definitely agree with the logic presented there. The portion, this is at the beginning of chapter 2, God's Angry Man, where they're talking about this infamous incident in Harlem where Minister Malcolm kind of gets one of his first public displays of the amount of power relative that he has within a system of white supremacy, where it says, in Harlem, patrolmen routinely subjected black men to random searches and brutal force. I think I've spoken on the program many times. I don't even reference what they call stop and frisk or stop and search, depending on where you happen to be in the world. In Canada, it's called carding. All these different titles and what have you. Whites have been doing this for eons, and they'll be doing it as long as the system of white supremacy exists, whatever new monikers they might concoct to describe the regular, routine, and mandatory harassment and fondling of black people, males and females. But I thought that was significant. Let's see the next one. Important, I thought, for election season, because I do hear people sometimes they submit that not voting, like that is the answer, or that is a counter-racist act that we can engage in. And not that I'm encouraging anybody to vote, but that's not really anything, like that's not a new idea. Whites didn't even allow us to vote for a very long time, so that would be one if we're talking about voting in an election of some sort. And then you've had many black people for many, many years who've taken the stance that it's not really going to have much of an impact anyway, so I'm not going to do it. Just that did stand out, because I even hear that now, people saying that, I'm black, and I just saw an article this week, black people saying that they're not going to vote in the presidential election. Not saying that there's anything wrong with that, just that it's not new. That is a very old concept. Also, within the same sentence, they didn't, talking about the Nation of Islam, they didn't even vote. Instead, the nation occupied an insulated world of complete separation. In my view, I talked about this before. I think firefighter in Florida commented on this notion of quote-unquote separation within a system of white supremacy. It's completely inaccurate. The term should not even be used. When Mr. Fuller, when he talks about integration, segregation, that these are just not accurate terms in talking about white supremacy, and they really just promote confusion. What I talked about when we brought this concept up, I believe it was last week, the week before last, that how separate is separate. How do you enforce that? Whether it's going to be separate here in this part of the world or if you're traveling to someplace else, how exactly do you enforce that? If the Nation of Islam was separate, then we wouldn't have had this incident with Mr. Henson, him being bludgeoned and terrorized by an enforcement officer in New York. Hinton, We wouldn't have had this incident if they were quote-unquote separate. The Nation of Islam would not have been infiltrated by numerous quote-unquote agents, people working for racist white supremacists, if they were quote-unquote separate. This wouldn't have been a problem. And this, in my view, someone wrote that today saying the same thing. The answer is separation. It's totally inaccurate. And again, it's, in my view, it's significant because it's promoting an inaccurate way of thinking about racism, white supremacy. I'm not even getting into the financial aspect. I have no idea how you quote unquote separate yourself financially from the system of racism, white supremacy, getting off of their currency and how they value all that. I wouldn't even know how you would begin to do that and have the muscle to enforce that wherever you happen to be on the planet in the known universe. I think you all already touched on the significance this incident when the beating of Mr. Hinton and this getting a lot of attention on Minister Malcolm X. Racists, they have the ability to get large numbers of whites and even a sizable number of non-white people that can just focus on you as an organization or just you as an individual and spend full time getting to know you better than you know yourself to do whatever they want. If that means permanently neutralizing you by ending your life, if that means putting you in greater confinement, if that just means wasting a lot of your time and energy with nonsense, getting you in conflicts with other people. I mean, just a variety of means. And again, a lot of this comes out in detail in Jack Olson's book, which I really enjoyed, not Black is Best, which is about Muhammad Ali and black athletes, but Last Man Standing, the tragedy and triumph of Geronimo Pratt, former member of the Black Panther Party and Vietnam War veteran, grandcestor, in my opinion, rest in power. But he has just tons of information, even though he's a white author, in that book about just the pervasive level of surveillance that black people were under, and just the variety of strategies that they would come up with to neutralize black people who were trying to do something constructive, trying to solve problems for black people, end racism, white supremacy. And these enforcement organizations like BOSS in New York, a part of the COINTELPRO apparatus, where they're coordinating activities nationally, locally, internationally, and I'm sure he's going to get to it. As a matter of fact, I can hush on that because some of this stuff is going to come up later. I was going to talk international, but that is to come in the book. Let's see, moving into chapter 3, the Gorgeous George bit, that they actually have documentary footage of Muhammad Ali, or you get to see Gorgeous George and then Muhammad Ali talking about him seeing Gorgeous George and how that kind of impacted some of his thinking to a degree. I've seen that cited in other sources as well, him talking about the impact that Gorgeous George had on him, and promoting yourself and talking and being more of a spectacle. Some of that is in the documentary that I mentioned, Muhammad Ali made in Miami, which is fantastic. Is quoted in this book. You should check it out. Great film. I used a segment of it at the beginning of the program. There were a few other things that stood out, but I will pause there. If folks that have not tuned in, if you have comments you would like to share, anything stood out, feel free. Go ahead and get your hand up now before we get to the second audio segment. We have about 10 minutes before we transition. While I'm looking for them, any of the other folks who dialed in, if you all had any other comments you want to make sure you get in before we get to the second audio segment.
Yes, I just wanted to say with the last part that you brought up in regards to the surveillance, and I read the paragraph about they said if he smelled the flower, the FBI would know about it. I was just saying, think about that being, the 60s, where there was no technology, no cell phones, none of that stuff, and they literally knew just about every minute of every day of his life. And think about today, where they just have invaded our lives with all of these so-called tools of technology that are actually tools of surveillance. Things are a lot worse for the average citizen as far as just them knowing almost everything about us the same way they did then. And I think that the fact that before technology they knew these kind of things really goes to show the intense focus on racism, white supremacy that white people have, to not have that kind of technology but still have that kind of knowledge and insight about another human being's life. Thank you.
I was just going to say that the personality part of what was Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, that was already intact. That was already intact well before he met Gorgeous George. I think he got from Gorgeous George was the professional means of, I think I heard you say, professional means of self-promotion. Because one has to examine, examine black athletes, quote unquote. They, especially boxers, they primarily did what their trainer asked them to do, and even though that time Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay wasn't doing exactly what his trainer wanted him to do. They also referred everything when it came to business or promotion solely to their manager, and this still happens a lot today. To their manager and or some promoter, and Muhammad Ali participated in that process. He was very, very much aware of things other than just putting on a pair of trunks and some boxing gloves and fighting. and he used it very well to his best interest, as far as that concerned, and that played a large part. It played a large part on why he was primarily, at one point in time, probably the most popular person in the world, based on his own personality. But at the same time, he was very approachable, which really gives you some sort of an insight on other athletes, black as well as white athletes. Well, really, the only ones I'm concerned about is the non-white black ones. So I'll stay there. That he didn't walk around with necessarily with bodyguards, being very unapproachable and whatnot. He would impromptu be walking down your street, and the only way you would know it, that people would be yelling and screaming and whatnot, and all of a sudden everybody would see you head over shoulders of everybody, Muhammad Ali. You know, he's on your street corner or something like that, just talking to people. He was like I said, the promotion part, he kind of like adopted that from Gorgeous George, but that's about it. His personality, according to everybody he grew up with, they had Sports Illustrated had a expose on him during his 50th birthday, and they interviewed people who knew him before he became a national figure, let alone talking about a global figure. And all of the stories that they had was telling you on what we come to know this person as, especially if you over 50 years old. You know, you have a good memory of him before he had that medical condition. Yeah, that's basically what my observations are. Thank you.
Right on. I did want to make sure I got in as well. They described Elijah Muhammad as being paranoid about other people within the nation, him not really trusting them too much, and eventually, obviously, this playing out with Minister Malcolm. This is to come later in the book. It is just within a system of racism, white supremacy, and I've heard, many other people address this, to be labeled as paranoid when you are actively under surveillance, and you do have people that are coming to spy on you and probably tapping your phone and God knows what else. It is quite a contradiction, it is quite a paradox, I'll put it that way, to label a black person as being paranoid in a system of racism, white supremacy. I thought that was fascinating. So the system of white supremacy pushes you in that direction, and then if you are, in my view, logically, quote unquote, paranoid, then you get attacked for that, as though you think there's some conspiracy and whites are just up to all these nefarious plans and what have you, and snooping around and doing this and doing that, and then you find out that they were doing way more than you ever thought possible, which tends to be what you hear from black people from this era, even the ones that were labeled militant, radical at that time. Almost uniformly, them saying, we thought racists were up to some things. We had no idea how much they were up to, and we probably still don't know everything that they were up to and are up to now to make sure that they maintain domination over non-white people worldwide, especially black people. This certainly reminds me, we did do a book study session on Malcolm X, his autobiography. 2015 wasn't that long ago, roughly a year ago. We did the study session. We talked about the hate that hate produced, the documentary, and a lot more detail, obviously much more focused on Minister Malcolm X, but that is in the archives. You can go back and check that out if you want to get more detail on Minister Malcolm. Anything else folks want to make sure they get in before we get to second audio segment?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who was the CEO of the Nation of Islam, I would suspect that he was aware of some things that Minister Malcolm was not aware of, and from the aspect of Minister Malcolm taking his delivery, his speeches, and what he was ambitiously desiring to talk about, within at the same time trying to convert people into the Nation of Islam. I think it really did make the minister kind of like, whoa. Anyway, I read this it was an interesting book on this subject that I'm talking about. I just can't think of the name of it or the author right now. I have the book around here somewhere in my library, where they mentioned that particular scenario. And for instance, two speeches, the message to the grassroots and the ballad of the bullet, was actually kind of like went outside of, the religious teachings that he was very good at, and how he was able to match the religion of Islam with non-white black people's reality, especially in this part of the world. And he actually went beyond that to a more secular understanding of racism and white supremacy. And that kind of like drew some concern from the administration. I put it that way, not just Elijah Muhammad, but the administration of the Nation of Islam.
For sure. With that, if folks have commentary that you did not get an opportunity to share, feel free. Make a note. We should have time after the second audio segment concludes if you have additional comments that you would like to get in. We are early in Chapter 3. I think just like the first 2 pages or so. We didn't get very far in it. But this is Chapter 3, Blood Brothers, Chapter 3, Who Made Me Is Me. And we're picking up the paragraph where it says, before Gorgeous George departed Las Vegas, he talked briefly with Cassius. That's what we're picking up at in Chapter 3. Context of White Supremacy, audio segment number 2, Blood Brothers.
Before Gorgeous George departed Las Vegas, he talked briefly with Cassius. Clay had gone to the wrestling match, watched the packed house scream insults at the foppish athlete, and met with him afterward in the dressing room. Boxing, wrestling, it's all a show, he told Clay. A lot of people will pay to see someone shut your mouth. So keep on bragging, keep on sassing, and always be outrageous. Clay got it. He understood that most beat reporters were less interested in the truth than a good tale. Every day or so they needed a story to file, and they spent their lives scrounging for copy, digging for leads, tracking down facts, conspiring for quotes. Trouble with boxing today, Cassius told a reporter after the Sabadong match, is most boxers don't want to talk. Say, yeah, no. You writer men ain't got nothing to write about. Look at Ring magazine. It loaded with stuff about John L. Sullivan and all them old-timers. Nothing else to write about. He knew the solution to the sport's woes. It was him. And he expressed it with candid specificity. Boxing need fighters who talk a lot and kill. Fighter today, he bring 2 or 3 girls with him to the fight and go into the ring with his hair all waved silky. In the olden days, a fighter go back in the woods and train and drink tea without sugar in it, getting mean. Today, temptation is abroad in the land. There's more pretty cars these days, and you can get 'em cheap. Everything's $1 down and a liquor store on every corner. Rock and roll show in town every week. But Cassius Clay go to bed at 9. I'm eating them lima beans, collard greens, okra and tomatoes, and spinach. Man, them are things that stick to your kidneys. Most guys eat crackers and soda pop and expect to stay in shape. But Cassius Clay, he a determined young man. When he lay down on a guy, that guy's supposed to go down. So, as I see it today, I should be champ when I'm 21. You writ that? After his short exchange with Gorgeous George, Cassius became the most vocal and opinionated athlete in America. He sounded off on topics ranging from boxing and diets to music and foreign policy, though rarely did he address racial issues or domestic politics. When he said, "The trouble is boxing's dying because everybody's so quiet," he meant it, and he made it his personal mission to pump some noise into the sport. He lectured on his personal growth. "I'm mature. I'm growing a mustache. I shaved yesterday for the first time." He rendered an opinion about his similarity to the leaders of communist nations. "Man, the way I've been talking, if I didn't back up my talk, I'd have to leave town. I'd have to leave the country. Take a man like Fidel Castro. He say, 'I gonna do this, I gonna do that.' Next morning, rat-a-tat-tat, 6 people die. He'd do it. So I talk big, and that just makes me fight harder." And, of course, he mentioned his importance to the Fourth Estate. "I'm the best friend a reporter ever had, because I always give good quotes, changing them around so everybody gets a fresh one." Some sports writers thought he was charming and refreshing. Others found him conceited and bombastic. When Houston Horn of Sports Illustrated met Clay in 1961, he noted that the boxer was irrepressible, impish, cocksure, and sometimes utterly unbearable. But it mattered little how they felt about him, because they all wrote about him. Clay became, for the early 1960s, what Joe Louis had been for the mid-1930s, a singular, transcendent force in the world of sports. In the Depression, sports writers had competed to pin a tag on Louis, coining such monikers as the Dark Destroyer, the Tawny Tiger, the Chocolate Cobra, the Ebony Assassin, the Saffron Sandman, and, of course, the Brown Bomber, among scores of others. Virtually all referred to his skin color and destructive power. Clay's nicknames included the Louisville Larriper, the Mighty Mouth, the Mouth That Roared, the Marvelous Mouth, Claptrap Cash, Cash the Brash, and, most famously, the Louisville Lip. They suggested neither his race nor fighting ability, but alluded to the tenor and volume of his verbiage. In an age of celebrity, when fame was conferred on the loudest self-promoters, Cassius Clay was reaching for the moon. He even dressed the part. Aware of his audience, fashion was important to him. "If the women come, the men got to follow. Ain't that so?" he asked a reporter. So his ring attire was clean and light, white shoes with 3 coats of polish, white satin trunks, and a white satin robe. To complete the look, he spread a thin coat of Vaseline on his arms and torso to make me look real muscly. He appeared almost ethereal as he danced, light-footed, in his corner before the bell and glided toward an opponent. As much as possible, he tried to take the pain out of fighting, at least the pain he suffered. "Women don't like the sight of blood, so I make sure they don't see none of mine by not getting hit." For him, boxing was a sport of speed and grace, not shuffling and slugging. He was a self-made product, and he knew it. Frequently, he said, people he knew approached him saying, "Cassius, you know I'm the one who made you." Maybe all they had done was give him a lift to the gym or a piece of advice, but they wanted to make sure that Cassius did not forget them when he started to write his name on the back of large checks. Number 1 on the list of claimants was his father, who talked endlessly about the sacrifices he made and privations he suffered to allow his son to reach his dreams. Cassius understood his father's motivations. "If I had a child who became rich and famous, I know I'd want to cash in too, like my daddy. And I guess more teenagers ought to realize that they owe their folks." Yet the truth of the matter was that his father did not make him. "When you want to talk about who made me," he told a reporter, "you talk to me. Who made me is me." "There's only one Cassius Clay," Dundee said. Thank God. Cassius was as unique as Coca-Cola, and like the Atlanta soft drink maker, he branded and marketed himself. Often when fighters trained, they advertised the training camp or a hotel where they worked out. Sonny Liston frequently wore Thunderbird Hotel T-shirts, giving a plug to the Las Vegas hotel. Grossinger's, the popular Catskills resort, was another favorite of boxers in training, and the name adorned such heavyweights as Floyd Patterson and Ingemar Johansson. Shortly after he began training at the Fifth Street Gym, Cassius started wearing crisp white T-shirts with his name printed in the front in bold red Spencerian script, reminiscent of the Coca-Cola logo. No other athlete in America exercised, ate, and slept in a shirt branded with his own name. Clay was years ahead of his time. The shirts revealed a conscious effort not only to market his name, but also to inscribe that name onto the landscape of American popular culture through the art of self-promotion. He had a genius for marketing himself. In September 1961, Sports Illustrated started work on their first feature about Clay, assigning Houston Horn to write the piece and Flip Schulke to contribute a full-page photograph. For most of a week, Schulke trailed Clay, snapping pictures of him training in the Fifth Street Gym, eating with friends, and mingling with the residents of Overtown. During a lunch at the famous Chef Café, Cassius told Schulke that he wanted to broaden his base of appeal. "I want to get into life," he said. Schulke, who had recently shot some underwater photos for the magazine, replied, "I really don't know how I can get you into life." The next day, when Schulke arrived at the Sir John Hotel, Cassius jumped into the pool, splashing around and throwing punches in the water. The photographer was intrigued by the trail of bubbles the punches made. They looked like the tail of a comet, and reminded him of the underwater water-skiing photos that had appeared in Life. When he mentioned it, Cassius immediately invented a story telling the photographer that the underwater work was part of his training regimen. It increased his punching power and hand speed. He had learned it from an old trainer, he said. Schulke came to the Sir John Hotel the following morning carrying scuba gear and an underwater camera to photograph Clay's unusual workout. Standing on the bottom of the pool in a perfect fighter's pose, throwing punches that created contrails of bubbles, Cassius smiled and mugged for the camera. The results were terrific, and Life published them in the September 8, 1961 issue of the magazine, several weeks before the Sports Illustrated feature appeared. Clay's ability to take Gorgeous George's shtick and make it his own, his intuitive understanding of precisely what reporters wanted and needed, and his ingenuity in breaking into Life magazine, all attested to his decision not only to reinvent himself, but also to redefine how others saw him. He would not be another Floyd Patterson, quiet, dignified, fearful of making a false step or offending white America, nor would he be another Jackie Robinson, speaking out about civil rights. His search was for autonomy in a country that had historically denied black men that basic freedom. In this sense, he identified with James Baldwin, the black writer who defied every simple definition. "I did not intend to allow the white people of this country to tell me who I was and limit me that way, and to polish me off that way," he wrote in his personal manifesto, The Fire Next Time. "And yet, of course, at the same time, I was being spat on and defined and described and limited, and could have been polished off with no effort whatever. Every Negro boy, in my situation during those years at least, who reaches this point, realizes at once, profoundly, because he wants to live, that he stands in great peril and must find, with speed, a thing, a gimmick, to lift him out, to start him on his way. And it does not matter what the gimmick is." Cassius's gimmick, and his mask, was the Louisville Lip persona. "I'm the boldest, the prettiest, the most superior, most scientific, most skillfulest fighter in the ring today," he told Howard Tuckner of the New York Times. "Man, it's great to be great." Tuckner responded by calling him a professional loudmouth and a windbag. But it was Clay who determined and defined the conversation, aware that the world may despise but never ignore a braggart. Since, as Cassius said, Floyd Patterson's got nothing to say and Sonny Liston can't say anything, he would determine the future of boxing. Whatever Americans, white or black, desired, he would be the man in the glass booth. All eyes would follow him. That is, as long as he continued to win. The bombast of Clay's pronouncements were not reflected in his matches, which he won in a workmanlike, unspectacular fashion. On July 22nd, he fought Alonzo Johnson in a fight of the week, outpointing the slick defensive boxer in a sleepy 10-round contest. Defeated but unimpressed, Johnson told reporters, who asked if Clay was ready to take on contenders, "He won't beat them boys." Dundee agreed, at least for the time being. He wanted nothing to do with them boys. On October 7th, he put his fighter in the ring against Alex Mitteff, an overweight, worn-out journeyman in the twilight of his career. Making Clay's chances even more certain, Mitteff, in the argot of the trade, was a bleeder. The slightest blow to his nose or eyes taps a stream of blood which cannot be dammed by Vaseline or medicated cotton swabs, noted a sports writer. Dundee expected that Clay would win a sanguinary victory, and he wasn't disappointed. Not long after the fight started, Clay's punches opened old scars on Mitteff's face. By the 6th round, the Argentine fighter was having trouble seeing through the blood and swelling around his eye, leaving him practically blind to Clay's punches. Then, midway through the round, Cassius landed a short, hard right, the hardest of his career, he said after the match. Mitteff fell, rolled over once, struggled to his feet, and stumbled toward a corner in the determined, important walk of a drunk. As Clay moved forward, the referee stepped between the boxers and stopped the fight. After the Mitteff fight, Dundee looked for another old, slow, and unimaginative opponent for his young, swift, and creative prodigy. Willi Besmanoff was perfect. The squat German heavyweight had survived internment in Buchenwald as a youth during World War II. After turning professional in 1952, he engaged in almost 50 matches before coming to America 4 years later. Soon, the ring ranked him among the top 10 heavyweights. However, by the late 1950s, he was losing more than he was winning, and by 1961, he was well advanced into the twilight of his career. Clay realized as much. To make the fight more interesting, he added a new wrinkle, a prediction. Besmanoff must fall in 7, he told a reporter. It was an audacious statement, an earthquake moment in the history of self-promotion. When asked to predict an outcome of a match, fighters usually mumbled that they would do their best. Some, of course, predicted victory, which, after all, was just an indication of confidence. But Clay predicted a round, a show of specificity that bordered on crystal ball soothsaying. And Cassius fully understood the power of his prophecy. It was magic, imbued with supernatural power, and as such, magnetically charged. Why did people come to watch him fight? They want to see that round. People are superstitious. It's the round that gets them. They don't want to see me win. They come to see that round. It was, he believed, an example of man's mystical hunger. People run to priests. They pray and shout in church. People is spooky-minded. They look at the moon. They wonder about numbers. Preachers say Jesus called them, but they got no proof. I got proof. The round I call is the round they must fall. The fight certified Clay's sagacity. It was no contest. By the 6th round, Besmanoff was bloody and disoriented, looking like a man caught in the middle of a busy street, wrote one reporter. Cassius could have finished the German off in the 5th or 6th round, but he carried him to the 7th. Then, in the predicted round, he knocked Besmanoff out cold. The fight was over, and so was Clay's time in boxing's minor leagues. In the year since he traveled to Miami to train with Dundee, he had put on muscle and weight, honing his technique and learning his craft. He had fought in preliminary matches and main event bouts before small to medium-sized crowds and on television. His record was a perfect 10-0, with 7 ending in knockouts or technical knockouts. He had fought half of his matches in his hometown, but now it was time to move on. In a feature article, The Ring called him the bonus boy of boxing, claiming he looked like the Rookie of the Year. Right now he has shown that he has the ability to handle the top-grade men, but how he would do against the ranking fighters is something which has to be answered. To be sure, some critics assailed his boxing style and promotional antics, But perhaps no pugilist had risen as quickly and as spectacularly. He had appeared on the pages of Sports Illustrated and Life, been the subject of hundreds of newspaper stories, and appeared in a feature film. He was ready, Dundee now felt, for the big time. By January 1962, Cassius had become impatient, veering in a more independent direction. Increasingly, his rhetoric mixed humor with mean-spirited jabs at other heavyweights. He complained to reporters that he was frustrated by the slowness of his advancement up the heavyweight division. He grumbled, "I'm tired of being fed on setups. I can't get a title shot by knocking out a bunch of has-beens and novices, mostly fighters who are over the hill." Although Dundee was in no hurry, for the right opportunity, he was willing to take a modest risk. In February, he accepted a fight against a tall southpaw from Detroit named Lucian "Sonny" Banks. Normally, Angelo would have avoided a boxer like Banks. Too inexperienced to be predictable, awkward, left-handed, and hard-hitting, he was the sort of boxer who made anyone he fought look bad. In his stumbling, free-swinging style, he recalled legendary trainer Whitey Bimstein's description of another untutored fighter. "Nobody never learned him nothin'." And because of his elbows and head advances, he often cut opponents. Angelo accepted the fight because it would give Clay national television exposure and would be staged at Madison Square Garden. The Garden was the summit for a boxer, as holy to the sport as Jerusalem and Mecca are to the faithful. Its landmark marquee jutted out between 49th and 50th Streets on 8th Avenue like a square chin, waiting to be punched. In its prime in the 1930s, the Garden was just a few blocks away from Stillman's Gym and the Neutral Corner Saloon, as well as a seedy collection of drugstores selling bandages and wrapping gauze, hock shops trafficking in fake diamonds and watches, and a few flea-bag hotels that rented rooms by the half hour. Even more run down by 1962, these blocks on 8th Avenue still reigned as the undisputed center of the world of pugilism, although the sport was falling out of favor with younger sports fans. Undaunted by the shabbiness of 8th Avenue and the state of boxing, Cassius was determined to restore the Garden and the sport to its glory days. A publicist's dream, he was like a wind-up toy. Just give the key a turn and point it in the right direction. A few days before the fight, he addressed a crowded luncheon of the Boxing Writers Association, boasting that he would save the sport, as Joe Louis once did. As for his upcoming fight, he promised, "If I don't beat Banks, I'll take the first plane out of the country." There had never been a heavyweight who looked so young, talked so fast, and smiled so brightly. To writers new to Cassius's shtick, it had the feel of a perfect New York spring day, fresh and scrubbed, with a hint of naughty fun. Enticed by the fact that Clay wrote poetry and was thus a fellow litterateur, A.J. Liebling, the fabled chronicler of the demi-monde, ventured down to West 28th Street, where Cassius was training. The writer had seen Clay box in the Rome Olympics and did not give him high marks. "Clay has a skittering style, like a pebble scaled over water," he observed. But the fact that Clay was a man of verse who could recite his poetry while doing sit-ups without breaking cadence astounded him. "He is probably the only poet in America who can recite this way," he speculated. "I would like to see T.S. Eliot try." Liebling captured Clay's light, whimsical quality, the way he glided through his training regimen, skipping rope without a rope, toying good-naturedly with his sparring partners, talking non-stop at record speed. Nothing about Cassius smacked of a traditional pugilist. He even dressed like a 19th-century man of letters from the school of Oscar Wilde. After his workout, he retired to the locker room and reappeared in a snuff-colored suit and lace-front shirt, the sort Liebling had seen in shop windows on Broadway, but had never known anyone with nerve enough to wear. The overweight, sharp-eyed journalist had spent much of his life around boxers and their retinues, and had lived in France and England, but he had not met anyone quite like Cassius Clay. Clay, he judged, might just be the fighter who could save boxing, a new hero coming along like a Moran tug to pull it out of the doldrums. A cold February wind lashed New York on the night of the bout, making it feel even colder than the 15-degree temperature. And for all of Clay's ballyhoo, only a smattering of people showed up at the Garden. Liebling wrote that the attendance was so thin that it could more properly be denominated a quorum. Only fans who like sociability ordinarily turn up for a fight that they can watch for nothing on television. And that night the cold had kept even the most gregarious at home. As Clay moved to the center of the ring for the referee's instructions, he saw a boxer very different from the ones he had been fighting. Unlike Mitef or Besmanov, Banks carried no excess weight around his middle. He was as tall and as heavy as Clay, and only a year and a half older. But where Cassius's face was round, Banks's was thin, with a long, pointed chin. His body was hard and muscular, with the kind of inverted triangle torso the pro-proletarian artists like to put on their steelworkers, wrote Liebling. His record was 10-2, and his career was on the upswing. At the bell, Clay glided across the ring like a ballet dancer, his high white buckskin boots seeming to barely touch the canvas as he moved toward Banks, who fought out of a crouch, advancing toward Cassius like a crab, with one pincher out front and the other close to its body. Wrapped in certitude, Clay circled, jabbed, moved, and talked, nimbly avoiding Banks's slow maneuvers. For a minute or so, it looked like a contest between a skillful matador and an awkward bull. Then, for only a moment, the matador took his eyes off the bull, and the fight took a sudden, dramatic turn. Forcing Banks into a corner, Cassius carelessly left himself open, and Banks lashed out with a hard left hook. It was a solid punch, knocking him to the canvas for the first time in his professional career. In Clay's corner, Dundee turned pale, as if he had just dropped an heirloom Ming vase. At the count of 2, Clay got up, appearing more embarrassed than hurt. At that moment, when it was most needed, he demonstrated his professionalism. He was cool. He didn't charge Banks in a fit of anger or back away from him. Instead, he boxed smartly. Cuff, slap, jab, and stick, the busy hands stinging like bees, observed Liebling. It was Banks who became overly excited, throwing wild punches and receiving punishment for his efforts. By the end of the round, he was spitting blood and was bone-tired from throwing and missing haymakers. For the rest of the fight, Clay was in complete control. His speed frustrated Banks, who fought defensively, like a man trying to fight off wasps with a shovel. As Banks's legs tired, his face became his primary defensive weapon. Near the end of the second, Clay floored him with a hard right hand, and in the third, Cassius continued the punishment, cutting Banks's eye so badly that the ring doctor had to examine it at the end of the round. The physician permitted the fight to continue, but it did not last long. Clay had predicted he would end it in round 4, and so he did. A quick flurry of punches staggered Banks, rendering him defenseless. That was enough to convince the referee to stop the contest. Afterward, Banks tried to explain what had happened. Things just went sour gradually, all at once. You gotta respect a boxer. He'll pick you and peck you and pick you, until you don't know where you are. Ringsiders had booed Cassius throughout the match, taking particular objection to his hospital white shoes, which they thought no self-respecting fighter would wear. And the sports writers were more impressed by Clay's antics than his ability. Cassius Marcellus Clay has the personality of a Roman candle and the potential to light up the drab skies of boxing, wrote Milton Gross. But the brilliance of the young heavyweight's tongue still outstrips his talent. The Banks victory earned Clay his first top 10 ranking. The National Boxing Association and Boxing Illustrated ranked him 10th, and the Ring 9th. He still had not fought an active contender, but he had climbed into the elite group. Some sports writers insisted that he belonged near the top, while others thought that he was a loudmouth fraud. But they all wrote about him. The combined strategies of Dundee and Clay had succeeded almost effortlessly. By spring 1962, Cassius Clay had become one of the leading draws in boxing. He fought only has-beens and never has-beens, none ranked among the contenders, without taking substantial risks, and his reputation soared. His appeal was so great that promoters vied to put him in yet another sure-bet match. In Los Angeles, matchmaker Joe Louis arranged for Clay to headline a card of contenders. Louis selected George Logan, a battered veteran fighter from Idaho, to fight Cassius. In contrast to Clay's flawless face, which gave no hint of his profession, Logan's displayed grim souvenirs of his ring wars. He was a fighter, columnist Jim Murray wrote, whose face makes him look like he wasn't born, he was knitted. He has taken more punches than a time clock, because he fights with the unorthodox style of a dartboard. Everyone involved in the fight understood that Logan was included because he moved ponderously, bled freely, and had no chance of harming Cassius's record or face. Cassius was the show. "I'm fighting the main event on Louis' first show," he said. "And what's the secret?" Stretching his mouth wide with his index fingers, he said, "Boca Grande." Fight night was a booming success for the promoters, but the actual contest was less spectacular. Clay made a royal entrance, accompanied by the house organist's rendition of Pomp and Circumstance. Preening and mugging for the cameras, he actually looked more like popular singers Chubby Checker and Sam Cooke than a professional prizefighter. Jim Murray wrote, "The love of Cassius for Clay is so rapturous, no girl could come between them. Marriage would be almost bigamy." Logan was less interested in aesthetics. He climbed into the ring with a large gob of Vaseline smeared over his eyebrows and had the look of a man being taken to the woodshed for a beating. Once the match began, he gamely went to work, stolidly pursuing his elusive opponent. But he had no answer for Clay's speed. He could not get close enough to hit him or stay far enough away to avoid getting socked. "He had less protection than a guy facing a Castro firing squad," wrote Sid Ziff. By the end of the first round, Logan's face looked like raw hamburger, and by the end of the second, spectators called for the referee to stop the slaughter. It was gruesome. Clay's punches sliced into the soft scar tissue above Logan's eyes like a hot knife into butter. Blood ran down Logan's chest, stained his trunks, and soaked the canvas. His cut man worked feverishly between rounds to stop the flow, putting an astringent into the wound, then smearing it with Vaseline, but the fix only lasted until Clay went back to work. Finally, midway through the fourth round, Logan's manager threw in the white towel of surrender. Logan protested the decision, not knowing how bad he looked. "It couldn't have been much worse if Clay had used knives," wrote a reporter. In his corner seconds later, Logan realized his condition and tried to hide his face while the ring doctor examined it. "I'm trying to keep my pretty looks," Clay told writers in his dressing room. Then his mind flew away from the mundane present and landed in the fabulous future. He continued to talk long after the fight had ended and most of the reporters had left to file their stories. He chatted about himself, his plans, and his future. More interesting was what he wasn't talking about. Only days before a major racial conflict in Los Angeles, Clay had still said nothing about the civil rights movement or the plight of black Americans. Far from reflecting a lack of interest, he kept much of who he was hidden away from reporters, buried inside himself. In April 1962, one could still only glean kernels of that hidden self. Publicly, he emphasized his Christian virtues. "I live by the Bible," he told Los Angeles Times reporter Paul Zimmerman. "My mother and father taught me to live right. No stealing, no cussing, no drinking, no smoking. The Bible says that he who reads the good book will understand to tell the truth." But other times he hinted that his religious beliefs were not exactly the ones he had learned in Louisville. Even when he was not in Miami, he pondered what he had learned at the mosque and in his conversations with Sam Saxon and the black Muslim ministers. During several talks with reporters, He addressed the subject of pork. Once at dinner during a long train ride, Clay witnessed sports writer Myron Cope cut into a roast pork loin. Cassius shuddered. "Poke give me a headache. Doctors tell me poke 90% live cell parasites. Poke 90% maggots. You let that poke lay 2 days, it get up and crawl. The hog is an unclean animal. Cat, rat, dog, hog, add 'em up." It was the language not of his Baptist mother or his father, but of Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X.
And that is where we will pick up at next Friday. We'll be at the beginning of Chapter 4. Context of White Supremacy. Folks who would like to participate, the number to dial, 641-715-3640. The code 564943 pound. Press *6 if you would like to participate. We'll try to grab all the folks who dialed in who have a hand up. If you did not get to participate during the first segment, think you have something that you would like to share, please do not wait until the last minute. Go ahead and get your hand up. If anything sticks out that you would like to comment on. All the folks who dialed in from the first session should be with us. Roz, retired firefighter, Thomas in New York. I will grab other hands as I see them. Folks have any comments on what we heard during the second audio segment? Proceed.
Well, I just thought I'll mention that Cassius Clay's, what he was called during that time, his first fight actually was against a enforcement official by the name of Tony Hunsaker, or something like that it's pronounced. And I've been knowing that for a long time, but it's ironic, with the present talk about law enforcement. That was his first fight. That was a profession of the person that he fought professionally. First fight. Yes. Angelo Dundee was very shrewd and smart. Well, in boxing, they call a coach a manager, a trainer. That was sort of his means of making a lot of money. He actually stayed with Muhammad Ali until his very last fight, which is a long period of time. And if anybody ever looked at studied the fight game, one can change their trainers a lot. We look at Floyd Mayweather. He's had several trainers. His father as well as his uncle, and that was back to the father. Several other fighters that that are very popular. But Angelo Dundee stayed with Muhammad Ali through his entire career. And I'm pretty sure he made a lot of money in the process. And his means of coaching Muhammad Ali was rather tactful, because he was not going to, a person like Muhammad Ali, he was not going to be able to be overbearing and tell him what to do, that sort of thing, and get any constructive results because of Muhammad Ali's personality. And I believe that's why also him and Minister Malcolm, what we actually are studying, but also with Jim Brown had a similar personality, except for he wasn't as I don't want to use the word bubbly, but that's what I'm thinking about. But nevertheless, they were kind of like dominating in their personalities, put it that way. And they weren't going to accept someone being condescending to them to tell them what to do. And it's ironic because the football coach who had the most inspiration of Jim Brown was a white male who was very similar to Angelo Dundee. Very nice, didn't raise his voice or anything like that, and so he planned a lot of his fights. From my understanding with the black male, first name Sonny, that was a very dangerous fight for Cassius Clay during that time. And I've actually seen that fight. And he got hit pretty hard in that particular fight, where he could have actually lost the fight. But as of course we know from history, he basically got up off the floor and won it. But they were taking a chance, as the book stated. It didn't get to any juxtapose of Malcolm X in the second reading, but I'm pretty sure when we come back next Friday, it'll probably start right in with Minister Malcolm in it. But that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Any of the other folks have comments they wanted to get in on the second audio segment?
Hey, Gus, I'm going to chime in a little later because I missed quite a bit of the second reading, so I might chime in based on what I hear from you and the other callers. And then I'm going to read this section that I missed. Actually, I'm listening to the whole archive. Thank you.
Oh, right on. Notes that I made during the second audio segment. I wanted to get this in actually during the first audio segment when they were talking about the searches that they conducted for entrance to any of the temples, mosques with the Nation of Islam, and seeing they would smell the person, see if they smelled of alcohol, and then asking them if they had any drugs on them, that sort of thing. And if they did, then they would not be allowed to enter. Just contrasting that with what we heard from Norm Stamper and a lot of the rhetoric now, legalize all drugs, that would be best. That sort of environment just reminded me, I think, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, stance was we can do our own job promoting sobriety amongst the black people. That is something that I have tremendous appreciation. I think that was the stance that Minister Malcolm advocated, Elijah Muhammad, the Nation of Islam, and even Muhammad Ali with his training seemed to be advocating sobriety. And again, just make sure I get in my disclaimer, not that I think black people, non-white people should be incarcerated for any of these poisons that whites dump on us, but I just don't think the legalization is going to do correctly. Next note that I took down, this might be something that we can kind of keep an eye on, them kind of where chapter 3 ended at, where the second audio segment that we talked about ended, where Muhammad Ali did not really have too much to say about this, the civil rights movement, as it was called at that time. He didn't have too much to say. This is 1962, where he didn't have a whole lot to say about that. And even kind of where we ended at last week when he's in Miami training, it's saying that he went in the store. They would not allow, at that time, didn't allow Negroes to try on the clothing at the store. They didn't allow Muhammad Ali to put their shirt on. He didn't make a big to-do about it. Hey, I don't, want to cause trouble. They'll just calls the police. Let's just go to a black store and, we can get some clothing there. And kind of saying, wow, that, what do we make of that for this person who now, whenever someone wants to lob a critique at black athletes, I don't ever hear white athletes be criticized in that manner. I don't ever hear anybody criticize Tom Brady or Steve Nash, Martina Navratilova, but any of these white athletes, I just don't hear them subjected to the same type of criticism. But a black athlete, because they're not taking a stance on something political, frequently black athletes, because they're not saying something about racism, it is the contrast to Muhammad Ali. In this book, a major theme, at least through the first 3 chapters that we've read, that was not exactly Muhammad Ali during the early part of his career. He was not exactly, out when he's doing all this talking and self-promoting, that racism is not a part of what he is discussing. Some of that, I think, obviously, intelligence, you do not want to sabotage your career before it's even started by talking about racism. But I also think, at least the way that I'm reading the book, some of it seems to be coming across that this was an evolution in terms of him getting to this point where, yes, I am going to be talking about these. I am going to be talking about racism specifically, and I am going to be making political commentary on a regular basis, in addition to promoting my fights and all the other things that I'm doing. That this was all kind of an evolution, that this was not where things were at the beginning of Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, his athletic career. One of the other things that stood out as well, I might have to look at the narrator's name. This does not sound like a black narrator. Both of the writers of the book, Randy Roberts, Johnny Smith, they are both white men. This narrator does not sound like a black person. The narrator sounds like a white person. Certainly, I'm curious if folks have thoughts about that, particularly since there are so many passages where the narrator is reading direct quotes from Muhammad Ali, lengthy passages from Muhammad Ali or Minister Malcolm X, or Elijah Muhammad, other, prominent black speakers, where this narrator, that I think at least could be a white person, is giving voice to these prominent black figures. I'm certainly curious about how that is impacting folks hearing this book being read. Did folks have comments on the last 2 points? The narrator of the book, I'll get the person's name in a second, but the narrator of the book, if we think it's a white person, how that's influencing our reading of the book, and then the evolution of Muhammad Ali getting to a point where he is speaking out publicly about racism and political issues.
I agree. It doesn't sound like a non-white black person. As far as the readings, and it sounds just like a white person trying to sound like a black person. That's and not doing a good job of it. What was the second thing?
The evolution of Muhammad Ali speaking out publicly about racism and political issues. The book.
Yeah. Well, since he turned professional and he was down here in South Florida, he, as the book mentions, he was exposed to counter racist theory and understanding, and through the Nation of Islam, and it did impact him. But he was smart enough. I mean, when we are reading about and understanding that he had a mindset of promoting himself, of course, one have to admit that he was smart enough not to voice his personal opinions on racism, white supremacy. At the same time, knowing that he has a goal to to get to when it comes to his profession that he's in. So I'm quite sure that he was very conscious of that process. I mean, I've even seen pictures of him. He had before he became heavyweight champion of the world, riding around in a Cadillac convertible that he owned. There's a famous picture of him in what looks like a bank, sitting on top, literally, of a stack of stacks of dollar bills that was reported to be $1 million that he was sitting on top of. He had that type of outward nature during that time, but you can see as soon as he won the heavyweight championship of the world, you would get a tone of him still with his personality, but at the same time, a lot of periods of time where he would have a serious look on his face when he's talking about events other than boxing. Even talking about his profession, he would have a serious look on. He would have a serious look on his face. For various reasons, also at the same time, he was getting advice from Elijah Muhammad's son, who had by that time was his the Nation of Islam had taken over from the Kentucky white male millionaires, and he was getting advice from Herbert Muhammad in a lot of cases, to whereas he kind of like sometimes in interviews you would see him have a serious look on his face talking about whatever he needed to talk about in that particular interview. So yeah, it's almost like clear to me as far as from a chronological standpoint of his early career, and me knowing what was behind the scenes on what he was actually had some interest in, and how it evolved once he became champion. Now he didn't have anything to really back down on. Because he had reached his goal, all he had to do was just stay at that point from fighting. Also, another thing that is quite obvious, from reading in the book, is the indicator, and I'm almost in agreement with Mr. Fuller that boxing is not really a sport. It's like very, very, it's very atrocious atmosphere all around. Nevertheless, at that point in time, as is similar to what is today, black males is whatever you can get into without having to go to jail doing it. Without going to heaven and go to jail doing it. If you're making a living out of it, it can be something that can be, works towards your best interest. And at this particular time, it was going well for him at this particular time in his career.
Yeah. The caller at 5992. Did you have commentary you wanted to share? You should be with us as well.
Yes. May I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment about the author. Given the fact that these two courageous black men of revolutionary mindset during that time, and to hear a white author, really, for me, it takes away from them. It takes away from them as black men during that era and what they represented. And he reminds me when Steven Spielberg made the movie Amistad. When I watched that, I felt absolutely nothing, and I gave credit to Steven Spielberg for being a white man. I felt a black person should have made a movie such as Amistad. So that was my comment about the author. I'm really not feeling it, like in the blackness of it, if I can use that word. I'm just not feeling it from a real black perspective, from a white author. And one more thing, Gus, initially, when the program came on, I heard this white guy telling us to go back to Africa and, blaming us for the problems here. You said that was on a PBS show?
It was a white female that was not connected to the book club. I was just playing that because I was on, and I do try to play something just if I'm on before the actual start time of the program, because I know sometimes people do dial in early or are listening in early just to know that we are on, and we're just waiting until the actual time comes for the program to begin. But that was white female that from the summer, about 3 years ago, from the summer of 2013, in the aftermath of the trial for the murder of Trayvon Martin. And much like now, there was lots of conversation about racism. Clinton Yates, he's a black journalist with the Washington Post, and this white woman called him and left that 6-minute voice message on his machine that I played at the beginning, just because it had been a while since I had heard it, where she was, saying, go back to Africa and blah, 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 and everything that you heard. The people that tuned in early, the people that heard that, the gist of it, basically. And a lot of attention. He wrote an article about it, and he published it online, what have you. It got a lot of attention 3 years ago at that time. But basically, she's just saying that white people were tired of hearing black people complain about racism, and you've messed up everything here, and you bankrupted Detroit, and why don't you go back to Africa and, do something with your country. She said Africa, but she said country at the same time, so, whatever.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. The narrator is a white male. The narrator for this book, David Drummond, is his name. I posted a photograph of him on the Facebook page. The authors, again, Randy Roberts, Johnny Smith, they are also both white males. I know for me, that certainly... I don't really have a connection per se. I know people have voiced that before when we've read books, and they either the narrator was a white person or people thought the narrator was a white person. Sometimes that has been incorrect. It actually was a non-white person, but and where people said that impacted them to the point where they were not interested in hearing the book or reading the book or what have you, or it made it difficult for them to follow. That generally is not a problem for me. I'm generally just focused on, what is the information? What are we supposed to getting? But it certainly is something that I do pay attention to if it is a white narrator, and we're talking about these prominent black figures. And I know Bill Rhoden, black male, he wrote $40 Million Slave. He did a segment talking about Muhammad Ali, no less, and he was saying that hearing all of these white people writing about Muhammad Ali, and regardless of what they say, regardless of even if they are speaking accurately about the record and Muhammad Ali's stance on racism, that he was really disgusted seeing all of these white people writing about Muhammad Ali. What were you doing at the time? And at the end of the day, you are still white. I would add, you are still racist white supremacist, writing about this, whether you're making money about it or whether you just want to be the custodian of record when this topic comes up. I thought he made some really valid points. I'll probably include that in an intro to one of these sections, but that's something I think we should keep in mind as well, even as we're moving through the book and trying to get some accurate information, something we should be pointing out in terms of how white author, white narrator, how that impacts how this book is written, how this book sounds as we move through the text. Folks have anything else they wanted to make sure? Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I hate when white authors do books that are about black people, but this one is written by white people. I actually I like the white authors, like the one from the Chris Cowell book. They have that slang, that the southern drawl to them, or they have the English accent to them. I hate when it's just a plain old white person. I hear them talk all day. I think this has been very informative because I of course know about Malcolm X. I never really was compelled to study Muhammad Ali. other than, his boxing career and what's common knowledge, I never really looked further into it because he wasn't a relevant athlete in my era. I really didn't realize how impactful he was until I believe it was the year 2000, 1999, and they put this list out of the most recognizable people in the world, and he was number one. And I was like, wow, he wasn't as incapacitated as he was in recent years. He was still able to get up and move at that time and talk. And not well, you can see he had the shape, but he was still pretty much considered one of the world's most recognizable person of the first 2,000 years of what white people say is white people time. Anyway, I think the book so far has been good. I don't like the white author, but I see right now white people do a very good job of laying out the information well when they want to, and I think he's doing a good job of that. And that's about it. I'm looking forward to hearing more and seeing how this comes together.
Yes. Just wanted to say that I agree with the previous callers and everybody's understanding with the two white males and with the book and the reader. I mean, yes, and the reader. You just got to look at it like these two individuals. There are tons of photographs, recordings, interviews, audio-visual interviews, books, and and I'm saying that to say there's an endless amount of just putting that information together and putting out a documentary. I'm still seeing documentaries that I've never seen on Muhammad Ali, and I know that I thought I've seen them all, and because I've studied him ever since I was a little boy. But they still have so much film and stuff that they have not even put out. And then again, when you behind closed doors, you can arrange film and recordings and whatnot in any way that you want to put it. And this is other than the global system of white supremacy. White people have the means to control the narrative, even of these two individuals, especially if you weren't functional, or even alive during a time when they were, in Minister Malcolm's case, alive. In Muhammad Ali's case, when he was generally healthy up until in and around the late 70s. If you wasn't around, if you really wouldn't know other than what you saw on some of the old film clips, that sort of thing. Because after that, his medical condition really affected him to where he couldn't be that person that he was, and was actually, world known for. I mean, his personality did that more so than anything, as I mentioned. In that light, it does take away a whole lot. What keeps my interest is if the two individuals themselves.
Anything else folks want to make sure they get in last few minutes before we wrap this week's section up?
Yeah, one more comment. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, just to piggyback, the white author's kind of throwing me off too. I hate the voice of white folks in the first place, but where he really gets me is when he tries to make quotes of black people or talk in a so-called black vernacular. It's nauseating, but as far as the information, I think it's great. And I think it was good to see Muhammad Ali prior to his transformation, because it's almost like with Dr. Welsing, I've never seen her without her hair being in its natural state. So now that she's gone, I only know of her and think of her in that light. I couldn't even imagine a time when she didn't, have her hair and like straightened or something. And with this book, at least, is giving us insight into the Muhammad Ali prior to his transformation. And it's, I think, great to be able to see that transformation as it slowly takes place and who he is as he's going through his becoming. And I think it's a great book that you chose. Thanks again for choosing it.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on what you said earlier, Gus, about separating from white people. And, I personally don't think that it would be a good idea to separate from white people just for the fact that would put us all in one place and give them endless ability to do all kinds of stuff to us and experimentations and, it'll make us a lot easier to exterminate. I think they'll do it as easy as they do on the continent. And that's all I want to say.
Oh, yeah, Gus, one last thing. When you talked about in the Nation of Islam, how they search people for drugs and guns and things like that, it immediately made me think of their codification and how if we had that same codification, we might have been able to avoid Charleston, South Carolina. That was one thing that really stood out to me, was that form of codification back then and how much we lack it now and, how we pay for it. And I think that's one of the greatest examples of how we pay for a lack of codification. Thank you.
Right on. That should pretty much do it for this week's session. Again, next week we'll be picking up Chapter 4. Same thing. I think I've said this for most of the book study sessions that we do. Most of the people listen to the archives. You have commentary. If you want to write feel free. You can drop an email and we'll include it as we roll. This book is not very long. I thought it was a little bit longer than what it is, but it's looking like we will probably only be on this book for maybe 4 more sessions. We're on Chapter 4 right now, and looks like there are 17 chapters. They're not very lengthy chapters, so we'll probably be making pretty good time as we read the text. But if you have thoughts, feel free to drop an email untiljustice@gmail.com. untiljustice@gmail.com. If I pluck out different things from the references, the footnotes, as we're moving along, I will try to share either films or if it's some articles or what have you. I will share as we roll. There are lots of great resources that you can check. If you are looking for other material to read on Muhammad Ali, I think the biography most people go to is Muhammad Ali, His Life and Times. That was another book I did think about reading just to get some time on Muhammad Ali after his transition. I didn't pick it, but that's Thomas Hauser. Last name is Hauser. I think, unfortunately, that is a white man too, but that is widely referenced as a great piece of reading. A lot of information on Muhammad Ali's life, his experiences, his career, politics, white supremacy, of course. Widely cited as a pretty good book to get details. It was written some years ago. Not ancient, but it didn't come out in the last 5 years. But that's Muhammad Ali, His Life and Times. Anywho, we'll be here tomorrow. Compensatory call-in, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. We will catch up a very full week of events. We will catch up, hear thoughts, observations from listeners tomorrow evening. And then next week, Pam should be with us on Wednesday, give some of her views on what's been happening this summer. And that's Wednesday, the day before that, the MOVE organization in Philadelphia, they will be having their conference next spring. They are setting the details in motion and doing the promotion now. Ramona Africa and I believe Pam Africa as well. They'll be joining us on Tuesday. As I said, great to talk to them directly. I'm eager because we've had white people on the program who've done documentaries on MOVE and talked to some of them directly to get their thoughts on some of these whites that are doing these projects. And with the recent incident in Dallas where they used a robot to deploy a incendiary device to kill Micah Xavier Johnson, the alleged sniper in Dallas a couple of weeks ago. They have consistently said that the only incident that even remotely compares to that is the deliberate destruction when they burned down bombed the Move House in Philadelphia in 1985, May 1985, killing 11 people and burning down an entire block of black-owned houses. To hear their thoughts in comparison and details about the conference, but that'll be Tuesday. If you have questions, you can't find something in the archives, complaints, gripes, feel free, drop an email, untiljustice@gmail.com, untiljustice@gmail.com. Echoing the sentiments of Minister Malcolm X, the Nation of Islam, Muhammad Ali, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, sobriety would be best under conditions of white terrorism. We certainly want to be clear thinking so we can make phenomenal decisions to keep ourselves as safe as possible, and so we can use our brain computer to crank out solutions to help permanently solve this problem. Racist man, racist woman, racist child, whites. If you're going to be in a vehicle, out and about, enjoying the summertime, fine, be codified. You do not want to be under the influence behind the wheel. Buckle up. If you are in an automobile, that's whether you're a driver, passenger, even as a pedestrian, you do not want to be under the influence. You never know when it will be Daniel Holtzclaw, Darren Wilson, who will be pulling up behind you. We do not want to do anything that will make it easier for them to terrorize us, take our lives, or just cause us a lot of unnecessary problems, being in greater confinement, and the type of things that will follow you for years on your record, making it difficult for you trying to get things done. Just keep that in mind. Sobriety would be best. With that, thanks again for the folks tuning in. Hope it has been a constructive investment of your Friday evening. We'll be here in about 24 hours. Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed.
I'm a victim, brother.
No problem. You're a victim.
I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning.
Shut up.
The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.